So let's officially kick off the intro discussion.
Yes.
We're hopefully talking about consciousness and meditation and possibly Buddhism today. We could talk about Linux, but we talked about we talked about security and stuff the last couple episodes. So today we're going to go really deep. We're going to talk about metaphysics. We're going to talk about maybe epistemology. We're going to talk about what is consciousness, the deepest question of all. So Kurt, you were talking about your experience that made you want to talk about this. So
yes. Well, there are a few different experiences, but I can start with the Buddhist Temple. So that was more than a year ago. So I was in Thailand, and my friend is, well, I won't say his name. My friend is a monk in a Buddhist temple. It's called Wat Tham Krabok, and this is he doesn't like to say it's a unique temple, but it seems quite unusual because it kind of comes from a wandering monk tradition, whereas a lot of the other temples in Thailand are very formalized and they fit in one of two particular schools. This one doesn't really. And part of the reason the temple was founded was to be a rehab center. So I wasn't there for the rehab center, but I tried their medicine. And yeah, they rehabilitate a lot of opiate addicts there. So people come there from all over the world, and they spend like 15 days and they learn some meditation techniques, and they also take this vomiting medicine and vomit every day to try to clean out their insides. So
a little bit like Ibogaine or something.
Not really, because it's not psychedelic. I mean,
it's just to vomit.
If you essentially, yes, it's apparently if you held it down, they say you feel a bit drunk. So the idea is when you vomit, you want to really vomit. So this stuff, they just call it, yeah. They just call it the cutting medicine. Cutting medicine. So this stuff, it tastes like motor oil mixed with fish oil, and the the smell is enough. Anyway, my buddy says that taking this stuff is a form of meditation on its own. But I tried that. I also I did meditation every day there. So 2 or 3 times a day, my friend would give us meditation instruction, and it was interesting because I guess I kind of had a narrow view of what encompassed meditation before I went there. Actually, it's very broad. There's almost anything you do can be meditation, I guess. But even in sitting meditation, there's 2 main types. There's one where you focus on something, and there's one where you don't really focus on anything and just let things go. But you can focus on like a sound, like listen to music, or you could reconstruct music in your head, or you could even try to think out a topic rationally. That would also be classed as meditation according to the broadest definition.
Just as long as you focus on one thing at once?
As well, like I said, either focus on one thing. You mean one thing
I'm
at
asking
once.
how thinking about something rationally would fit the definition of meditation.
Sorry?
I was just asking how thinking about something rationally would fit the definition of meditation. That seems like a little bit broader definition of meditation than I'm used to.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing.
Just kind of mindfulness? Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah. I mean, you aren't trying to... I guess that's one element of it, and this is probably the most important element, because my friend would say to us, like, sometimes people will think of things and they'll go off on a long train of thoughts, and then they stop and they think, hang on, what was I just thinking about? And they have no idea where that train of thoughts came from or where it went. because they weren't being mindful of their thoughts, which is kind of weird because you think like those two things should go together, but they don't necessarily.
I can definitely relate to
Is
that.
it okay to allow your thoughts to wander as long as you're observing them and being mindful? And also I wanted to ask, what do you think are the different benefits of the different types of meditation? Are there specific circumstances you would use one over another?
Yeah, okay, that's it. I'm not sure I know the answers to those questions entirely, but let's let's see. So
Like, give us your wild speculations.
well, what was the first question about letting your
So
thoughts wander?
under this training, under this the Buddhist training that you're talking about, is it okay for your thoughts to wander as long as you're being mindful of them, or is the idea to not let your thoughts wander at all?
Okay. Yeah, so as I said, there are the two main types. So if you can let your thoughts wander, and this is like, my friend compared it to a stream, and the stream can just flow, and you kind of don't resist it, so you just let it go where it wants to go. And the other kind is more like, say you have a ball in a stream and you're trying to kind of get it to float at a particular position. So there's nothing right or wrong about either one. I'd say for me personally, if I feel like my mind is very busy, then I would normally go with the form of meditation without an object to try to quiet my mind. But it depends. I mean, everybody can experiment and find what's best for them. So the one key thing that I think is the act of seated meditation, like just sit and do nothing. Once you do that, basically everything from that point is good. So the key is, don't judge what you're doing. Like, don't think, I'm doing this wrong. Is this bad? Is this right? Should I be seated in a different position? As long as you're there, sitting and doing more or less nothing, then you're on the right track, I think.
So it's just about kind of like the intention that you're trying to focus on something. You're trying to focus on a goal, or maybe lack thereof, but you're focusing on a process, maybe.
Yeah, the process. It's about the process. Yeah.
and I think, Anthony, your other question was, what do you think the benefits of meditating are?
It was do you think that there are any particular circumstances or benefits for using one type of meditation versus another, right, in different circumstances?
Yeah. So as I said, I use the form without an object to relax. That's for me. But also, I'd say if you want to gain insight into something, then you can focus on that. So some people will just focus on an idea like compassion and try to expand their own compassion through meditation. And I'd say that will probably work.
So it's kind of like whatever you focus on is the thing that you're trying to improve.
I'd say so, but it doesn't have to be. I mean, the thing that you focus on could just be a device. So my friend gave me this other analogy. He said that any meditation technique is like a tugboat, and this tugboat will just putt away and it'll get you out into the middle of the ocean. And once you're out there, that's where you want to be, like in the great expanse of nothingness.
Yeah. How much do you feel like you could sort of just be meditating throughout your normal day, whether you're standing in line or driving, or is meditation a state of mind that you think is beneficial that you can extend to your entire waking consciousness? Or is it more of something that you want to focus on at like periodized moments?
Do all of it.
All of the above, right on.
Are you guys familiar with Eckhart Tolle?
Yeah, I was actually about to mention him. When I started trying to do more of the presence meditation that he talks about, eventually I was kind of like, huh, this is cool. I feel like I'm just, for a period of time, it was difficult to be self-reflective, even in those silent moments. But then it got to where I said, oh, I'm kind of just doing this, most of the day, which was an interesting, discovery for myself.
Yep. And, I think if you practice it a lot, you'll even find that you might wake up in the middle of the night and you're actually being present during your sleep, which is a bit, it sounds like something that shouldn't be able to happen.
Like lucid dreaming?
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, I mean, some people also have that experience where they'll be in a dream and they decide to sit down by a tree and meditate in their dream. And of course, it's if you can do that, then it's a lot easier to get into a deep meditation.
It's like Inception.
Yeah, kind of, yeah.
meditating within a dream.
Yeah.
After that movie, I actually did start waking up inside of dreams and still be dreaming. I think that movie affected my sleep somehow.
Oh, I think it totally incepted all of us.
Yeah.
That movie,
maybe that was the point.
It definitely changed reality forever.
I think we could say that about any movie, but
Yeah,
whatever.
but not.
Yeah, some more than others.
What do you guys think about? Have we all seen that movie, by the way?
Yes.
Yeah.
So do you remember the end scene where there's like a top and it's spinning and it's like?
Oh, you should have given the spoiler alert. All right.
Well, I guess we can cut it out, but
Or just cut in a spoiler alert.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think? You think it fell down, or do you think it didn't?
I think it was intentionally left ambiguous.
Yeah, I think it. Yeah, I think it intentionally did not either fall down.
Cool.
Or not fall down.
That's kind of what I said afterwards, and everybody was like, "No." Everybody had like a really definite opinion, like right after the movie came out. But I was like, "No, I think it was intentionally ambiguous." But I guess you guys all agree with me. So
the first time I watched it, I did it with the Drexel Philosophy Club, and everybody definitely had the same opinion, that they were like, well, it didn't fall, but maybe it did, but we don't know, and we never will.
Mm-hmm.
That leads to broader philosophical questions. How do we know that all of this isn't some, magnificent, extravagant dream that each one of us is having? How do you know that when we die, we don't wake up, into an entirely other world? And then could we ever reach any conclusion that anything that exists is nothing more than a dream in the first place?
Matrix.
We can't.
Yeah, I don't think that from
22 is
within our
butterfly.
own perspective, we could figure that out. I think that's kind of the nature of us, is we can only see out of our own little eyes or mind or dream or whatever it is. So it would be pretty tough to try to step outside of that and conclude what the framework is that we're working with.
Yeah, it might be kind of an unfalsifiable theory. I could say, well, this is just a dream world. It's my personal dream. One day I'll wake up 70 years from now into another dream. But how can you test that? How could you prove it? All you could do is maybe suspect it, but I'm not sure if we could ever prove that.
Yeah, well, I know I always do these dream checks. I can always check how many fingers I have on my left hand and go through and count them one by one. My buddy Will told me he was in a dream and he's like, all right, something funny's going on here. I better check. And it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. No, that's definitely the normal number of fingers.
Yeah, another way to check and kind of like enter lucid dreaming is, especially if you like wear a watch. This doesn't work for me because I don't ever look at a watch. I don't wear one. But to look at the watch, and usually there's something seriously wonky going on with the time, like it's completely stopped, or it's like some Salvador Dali kind of clock where it's all melting in front of you, and you're like, hold on a second, this might not be real life.
I guess one thing that at least I could say about my own reality, if trying to test the idea that it's a dream or not, is my reality seems to work in a pretty consistent way. Things don't surprise me or completely break my model too often in terms of like, I don't see clocks melting and I don't all of a sudden have 8 fingers. Like, it seems to work in a fairly consistent way, but I cannot say that about my dreams.
So you would say that definitely the reality that you're experiencing now is more concrete, it's more solid than what you would experience in a nighttime dream.
Yeah. I mean, if this is a dream world, then this part of the dream world is more solid or consistent than the dreaming part of the dream world.
Yeah, definitely. So hypothetically, maybe we could say that this reality that we're experiencing, what we call waking life, is in fact a very intricate, complex dream where perhaps we each are like this much greater mind, and we've sort of set these boundaries, we've sort of set these rules for this reality, and that death is kind of like waking up from that dream, but that no less, it's just a very extravagantly, purposefully limited experience where we might wake up into an entirely new reality upon death. I know that's kind of like far out there, but there's no way to prove it, but there's no way to disprove it either.
Yeah, I suspect that's right.
I sometimes suspect that's right too. I'm curious how many of us have seen the film Waking Life by Linklater, this conversation.
No.
I would highly recommend it. It's basically a movie that explores that idea very deeply. I don't know how I would explain it. Maybe Kurt, you could help me. It's kind of it's about a young man kind of wandering through a maybe dream world, maybe waking life, and having different philosophical conversations while his reality seems to float in and out of realness and concreteness and kind of break down.
That's a pretty good description. Yeah.
Sounds like something I should see.
It's excellent.
Yeah, it's a really cool movie. It's all filmed in rotoscoping. So they filmed it first and then traced over it. So it's half cartoon, half real, sort of.
Yeah, and everything has kind of this wavy quality to it.
Kind of like a Scanner Darkly, maybe?
Yeah, so A Scanner Darkly was, same director.
Okay.
He did that a few years afterwards. Yeah.
Cool.
So have y'all heard of the philosophy called solipsism or solipsism?
Yes.
It's somewhat of a dirty word in anarchy circles, at least for some people.
Wait, why is it a dirty word?
Yeah.
I think it's really popular in anarchism.
I think it's really cool too. For some people in the anarchist community, I think like maybe Mark Passio is very much against the idea of solipsism.
I guess there's a way to define solipsism for the audience.
Yeah,
so solipsism is a philosophy which states that the most certain thing that any person can have is of their own existence. And there's no way that you can doubt your own existence, although you could doubt the existence of the external world. And so because of that, they come to this place where they say, well, I'm the most certain thing in existence, and I'm not sure about the rest of the world. It could be a big dream, or it could be a brain in a vat kind of scenario like the Matrix. And so that's kind of the premise of it. You can take that to differing levels up to the point where some versions of solipsism deny the existence of the external world entirely and say that I'm the only thing that exists. I think that's taking it too far, but I think that the underlying mechanism, the underlying philosophical construct is really an interesting exercise, because I do agree with that I can't actually know anything more certainly than the fact that I am. Like, everything could hypothetically be an illusion. And so I think that's a really fundamental place to start from when we're trying to explore knowledge and which things are the most certain in our reality.
Yeah, and to add on that, as we were talking about before, this could all be a dream. So basically, we've been talking about solipsism for like the past few minutes. So it could all be a dream, but as Katy noted, the waking version of the dream, at least for people who aren't crazy, I guess, is very consistent. We can kind of test things about it, and generally our past experience has a lot to say about the future. Yeah, for most of it, it's very consistent, and so it seems like either it really exists or it's just a very good simulation.
Well, yeah, they say reality is an illusion, but it's a very persistent one.
Right. And the other thing is that other people exist, or they seem to exist. And not only that, but they seem to have similar experiences to our own. Mm-hmm. And so, and I can kind of ping other people. I can say, hey, what did you think about this? And a lot of times, not only will it be a similar experience to mine, but it'll actually give me more information about my own experience. It will actually help me predict my own reality better by talking to somebody, one of these, NPCs, one of these other people in my reality. So even though they might not be real, they might just be NPCs or whatever. What does that stand for? I forget.
Non-player characters.
Non-player characters. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this whole idea of like living in a dream, etc., is as I've been like researching and talking about it over the years, I kind of equate it more to a video game now. And I was just talking to a friend a couple of days ago, and he's like, it's a video game. He's like, it's a great video game. Everything here is like so HD and it looks so real. It tricks all of us into thinking that this is totally
virtual reality's got nothing on actual reality.
But it's really a video game. And the NPC thing really fits into that narrative too. Is like, and that's why I don't really believe in solipsism. Like, I think there is, yeah, sure, it's a game, right? But every game has a set of rules, and we can come down here and we can play this game, and we have to follow these rules. And some of these rules are the physical laws of, like if you jump off a building, you'll probably going to die, like gravity exists, or some kind of force, or, however you want to describe it, like there's cause and effect. So if you do that, this is what's going to happen.
Right. And but the crazy thing about dying is that nobody can, like, you can't actually die and experience that, I mean, so either there's an experience of it and it's some kind of transformation into some other world, or there is no experience. Exactly. So,
yeah.
Or you get like
that always
really close, and then everything.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely been a lot of literature written about near-death experiences, and like Edgar Cayce talked about it, and Robert Monroe talked about it, and something Professor Moody talked about it.
Yeah,
so there's, and like people come up all the time and they'll have a near-death experience and they'll come back and they'll talk about it. And it's anything from that one little kid who saw heaven and saw his grandfather at like the age of 6 because he was in the hospital for some reason, and he told his parents all about how his grandfather is in heaven, right, and saw this place that his grandfather was in after death. And described him in ways that his parents were like, well, he was born way after his grandfather died, so there was no way that he would have had these memories or been able to describe him. He was too young to like really see any of the pictures, etc. So it's all like verified, right, from experience of different people. So I think there is some sort of death experience that we can read about or we can talk about from people who have had it. But beyond that, even Robert Monroe, who was a astral projector, and he traveled all like around the different dimensions of Earth, and he had journaled all of it, and he wrote about it because he kind of like that gift kind of fell into his lap. And one day he woke up, from a nap on the couch, and he was standing over his body, and he was like, oh my God, did I just die? And he went to all of these specialists and psychologists and tried to figure out what was happening to him, and then just kind of embraced it as a gift out of nowhere and started really discovering and journaling about it and doing it, in a very scientific way. So he's met, he met other like souls or consciousnesses or whatever you want to talk, like whatever you want to call us, in other dimensions, being like, oh yeah, I used to be on Earth, but then I died, and here's where I am now. So it's all kind of documented, and we can look at it, which is pretty interesting. I think that's one of the biggest indicators that there definitely is something on that other side after the death experience.
Yeah, I remember that story. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just saying that ties into the whole us being a consciousness and us being this kind of like spiritual being who is experiencing life here on Earth in a physical body with all of these different external rules and laws.
I remember that story from his book where he has a very educated and very open-minded friend. Is this scientist guy who's just fascinated by everything, And then one day after he dies, Monroe sees his friend as like a puff of smoke or like a bunch of vapor coming through a vent, and his friend is like, "You won't believe the stuff I'm seeing, Robin," and then he just disappears. never.
Yeah, and then one of my favorite stories, it actually was like, it's really clear in my mind, that story that he talked about, because it really made me question my belief in God for about a month. I was 15 when I first read the book. And it's the second one. It's the ultimate, or far journeys. And he goes out there and he starts meeting these like alien creatures, and they kind of like communicate telepathically, and they put these ideas and messages into they call it a rote, right? So it's like this piece of like information that you can throw at somebody, and they kind of understand it with their entire being, because the communication out there is a little bit different than what we do with, our vocal cords. And he met this alien, and he was like, "Well, how did you get to planet Earth?" He's like, "Oh, well, me and my buddy, we were on this tour bus. We were like on vacation, and the next destination was Earth. And we got this little pamphlet about this like, demigod who created this garden, and he put a bunch of people on there, and, they're living out their lives. And we can go in there and we can like be one of those people and, only live for like 100 years, which is a minute in their timeline. And they're like, we can just go there and experience it. It's like this wild ride." And so he's like, and Robert Monroe was talking to him. He's like, "So why are you still here?" He's like, "Well, one of my friends went down there and he really liked it. So he went down there a bunch of other times. And every time he came down there, he kept forgetting who he was. And it was really hard for him to come back." And I was like, "Dude, no, like we gotta leave, like vacation's over." And he's like, "And now I'm stuck here waiting for him because he doesn't remember who he is. And every time he dies, he like goes back and reincarnates and lives these experiences over and over again, because he's addicted to this third dimensional, like dualistic world where you get to have all of these amazing experiences that for them seem to not be a norm. Like you couldn't find it in many other places."
So it's extremely well.
Sorry, it's extremely what?
Oh, I just said it. That's an extremely wild idea, and it's something that,
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, I would have just thrown it out the window even a couple of years ago.
Well, this is his second book, and I read through the first one. He really was like on point scientific, and I'm like, why would he make this up? So it's like one of those weird things where I'm like, I don't see a reason for him to lie. He was a very like scientific mind. This was back before we had all of these, consciousness, like mind-shattering movies out. And really the only people that were kind of throwing their imagination in those directions were the sci-fi writers, right? So
all this stuff, like, do you think, what do you guys think about like the reality of the situation? Do you think that, obviously there's a lot of anecdotal evidence, there's a lot of stories from people having these crazy sort of supernatural experiences. Is this something that is just common to all people, and therefore people can go inside their own minds and experience these things? Or do you guys think that there's something sort of objective, something kind of external to people's minds, something kind of some sort of common spiritual realm that all of us have access to?
I tend to think that it's only mind, that the only thing that actually does exist is mind, like in a very generalized type of way. Like the physical universe, everything that we have is just a derivation of that mind. And it's not even, although it's differentiated, although there's many different little minds, there's only one great mind, and we all belong to that great mind. We are all part of it, and we are also simultaneously the entirety of it.
Interesting.
Kind of like the universe contains us, and we contain the universe in its entirety. Like inside of me is everything else that exists, including all of you. It's like this kind of...
That kind of sounds like God.
It is. It's kind of like, even Jesus said, do you not believe that I'm in the Father is in me? Do you not believe that you are in me and that I am in you? So I think there's a lot of indications that point that direction. But it's also a pretty far out idea.
I think the term mind is not the correct term. I don't think it's a mind, but I definitely think it's some kind of collective connection of where we're the same but all individual. And through the different dimensions of space and time, there's like layers to that individuality. So in the 3D, we're super separated because we're all physical bodies experiencing this planet. But then I think in other places, it might be different. We might be more connected, or there might be some kind of, you know, like hive consciousnesses in different places. And
yeah, that's how I like to see it.
Yeah, and then at some point there's like, that's really like singularity, I guess, where maybe like God and us, and it's all like one big thing, and we're kind of all interconnected. But yeah, but I don't know, mind might just be too small of a term to talk about something so huge.
I tend to think of it as maybe like a wiggly matter, energy, multidimensional fabric, and
quantum physical.
Yeah, and when this stuff wiggles or moves or, you know, does things in certain ways, then it wiggles into kind of the shape of a human. Mm-hmm. And that's the experience that we're going through right now. But there's not necessarily a separation between humans and desks and air, because I don't really know how to explain it, but I think that we try to chunk things more than they really are chunked in reality.
Yeah, Tesla said, if you really want to, you know, find the secrets of the universe, he's like, just realize that everything's vibrations, and they're just like sort of kind of like different speeds or different levels of vibrations. That
everything is waves.
Yeah, somebody, I don't know, I was like talking to somebody on Facebook like a year ago, and they mentioned something. They're like, well, you know, rocks don't change. And I'm like, actually, rocks do vibrate, so technically they're constantly moving.
Yeah, you know, it's to kind of add on what you were saying. So first of all, quantum mechanics basically says what you were just saying, Katie, which is that and also you, Anastasia, that everything is a vibration, and that there isn't like on a really, like when you zoom in really far, there actually isn't much of a distinction between matter, energy, and consciousness. Wow, that was an amazing noise.
I'm on the 7th floor, but every, like, I can hear conversations of people down on the street there.
That was a really cool sounding car. That sounded like a Lambo or something.
It was a motorcycle.
Three Lambos in 1 week. It's crazy.
Anyway, so like I was saying, so actually science says that and if you look at quantum mechanics, particles are basically just a vibration. They're just a wave. And basically each particle that exists is kind of pops into existence and then pops out of existence instantly.
From as far as we can tell.
Yeah. And it appears to be sort of probabilistic and random if you zoom in far enough. So everything that like we have this consciousness that, like as I was saying before, everything looks kind of deterministic from our kind of zoomed out perspective. But when you zoom in really far, everything is probabilistic. I mean, basically quantum mechanics says that a human has a very, 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 very small chance of just walking through a wall. I mean, basically, you know, you could try it, you know, like just mind-bogglingly huge numbers of times, and, you know, throughout all eternity, eventually you would succeed.
Yeah, they say General Stubblebine. You know, General Stubblebine, he was the military guy. He was kind of in charge of what later got turned into that movie, Men Who Stare at Goats. And every day he would try to walk through his office wall just to see if that day was his lucky day.
I need to see this movie.
Awesome.
The book is more true to life.
Some of the reports of the Philadelphia experiment was that, you know, when they were like kind of messing around with teleportation, some of the reports had stated that when the soldiers were teleported and like they came back, that some of them were like killed because they were stuck in a wall because their atoms didn't remanifest in the correct way in the correct place. And
what's the Philadelphia experiment? I haven't heard of that.
So yeah, so it was on a ship. The Navy was like experimenting with, I guess, some kind of teleportation device. And
yeah, officially they said they were trying to be invisible to radar. Right.
So they were experimenting with that, and obviously, of course, trying to militarize it. But one of the big experiments that they did, and it was declassified later, was that, you know, all of these Navy like sailors died, and it was because the technology was definitely not advanced enough to be able to to separate all of their atoms and then put them back together in the right place. But it was one of the early like military experiments of that, and I don't know if it actually is mentioned in that movie, Men Who Stare at Goats.
I don't think so.
But it's definitely like in that same repertoire of the government like trying to do these really crazy metaphysical ways, but trying to do it through technology instead of through our own like evolution of our consciousness and opening up our gifts and our third eye, and, you know, doing all these different things, telepathy, telekinesis, etc. But then they're like trying to do it through tech.
So, have you guys heard of a physicist named Nassim Haramein?
No.
Yeah.
He has some really interesting reinterpretations of quantum mechanics. There's a really interesting experiment that was done. It's called the Vacuum Catastrophe, and it's a catastrophe because it was the most wrong prediction in the history of physics. What they did is they took a vacuum and they pulled out all the air. They shielded it from as much electromagnetic radiation as they could. They cooled it down to absolute zero, or as close as they could get to it. So they tried to construct the most pure vacuum, you know, even more pure than outer space. And you would expect that now that you've constructed this vacuum, it would be empty. You would look in there, you'd put a sensor in there, and you wouldn't see anything. It should be black. But instead what they found was it looked like a really fine fuzz, almost like on a TV screen, you know, those old TV screens when you're not tuned into a channel. And Chris, you were talking earlier about these particles, you know, that pop into existence and out. What they determined is that this light fuzz was actually particle pairs that would pop into existence for like, you know, a femtosecond or some ridiculously small amount of time, and then they would disappear back into the vacuum. So they did a calculation. They said, okay, what is the energy content of this vacuum space? And you would expect it should be really close to zero, but instead it was practically infinite, like to the point that if you were to take the volume of a proton, inside of that volume would basically be the entire energy content of the entire visible universe. So they called it the vacuum catastrophe because it was precisely opposite from what they expected it to be. And they kind of swept it under the rug. They just sort of ignored it for a long time. And they're still kind of ignoring it. Wow. So this guy, Nassim Haramein, has sort of a reinterpretation where he actually conceptualizes protons as tiny little black holes. And he conceptualizes the universe as a massive black hole, that everything is under this event horizon contained inside of a black hole. And that each little proton is kind of a copy of the universe. So that every single person literally contains, you know, trillions of copies of the universe. So it's a really interesting way of kind of realigning the, you know, alternative paradigm of thinking about physics, which I'm totally into.
So we're all just walking collections of trillions of universes, trillions of micro.
Basically, yeah.
I like there's a line. I think it's from the Tao Te Ching, where Lao Tzu writes that the perfect music is silence because it contains the potential for all other music. So that's sort of what it's like.
Of course, John Cage would agree with his masterwork, 4 minutes and 33 seconds. I'm sure you guys have heard it.
Yeah. I remember there was supposedly a lawsuit where somebody got sued because he used the specific one-page 4-minute 33 silence. Sampled it.
Intellectual property theft.
You guys know that silence is actually like extremely deafening. It is so loud. Because
that's called tinnitus.
Because you can like just hear the energy all around you, and it's just like the static. And the more you listen to the silence, the more static you hear, and it like starts to drive you a little bit crazy. I went hunting up north a couple years ago. It was my first like big moose hunt, and it's in northern Russia, and it's all like snow and white, and you're just sitting there and it's silent because none of the animals are out. And you're sitting there and you're listening, it just gets louder and louder and louder, and all of a sudden like it's in your ears. And it's like, but I'm being so silent.
Yeah. I mean, so that's your brain upregulating your ear sensitivity. I had a similar experience out in the desert in Utah this summer. I remember just like waking up in the middle, I guess waking up like right before sunrise, which was awesome. It was like this big canyon. And I just remember like just getting up and looking around and just being like, wow, I can't hear anything. There's no sounds anywhere. And it was like this really, my brain felt really comfortable. It was like, I can finally relax and hear my own thoughts kind of thing. But at the same time, I do have actually tinnitus in this ear, and it was like really extreme. But it felt like it was getting quieter the longer I kind of was mindful of it.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Mine was the opposite. It just kept getting louder. And then I'm like talking to my other hunter. I'm like, okay, let's get some tea. I'm like, maybe we can have a conversation.
I know what you mean. I don't think I would say that my experience of silent moments has been loud, but it's been overwhelming. Not in a sound kind of way, but in a vibration kind of way and in an emotional kind of way. It feels like everything, or any tiny sound that does occur, feels like a massive boom. It's an overwhelming thing.
No, I love regular silence. I'm like cool with that. That's really why we go up north with my family every year. We're just like, let's escape all of the noise. And then the house gets really, really quiet at night, and you can hear the cat snoring under the bed. It's like the most perfect experience.
I really do think that modern humans, at least humans that live in cities, experience much more noise in our day-to-day lives than our bodies were really designed to be able to handle. So I think it's good to get out and experience that kind of just pure silence of nature every now and then, to kind of just reset yourself back to kind of what am I trying to say? Like
recalibrate?
Yeah, recalibrate.
Yeah.
Exactly the word I was looking for. To your external environment.
Yeah, for my dad, it's actually really been like a routine. So he's one of those people who's extremely sensitive to the cities, but he grew up in it and, did business there, etc. He's now retired, so he gets to go up into nature a lot more. But he says, he never made decisions on Mondays, and he never made decisions on Fridays because he was out in the woods. And Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays was all about work, 24 hours a day, etc., to get all of that done and to just escape every weekend. Because, being an entrepreneur, like dealing with all these different things, and at that point it was like the 90s in Russia, after the Soviet Union breakup. So it was like extremely important to get out of there and recalibrate and think about things in the quiet and be out in nature and reconnect with everything and sleep on the earth in a tent, et cetera, et cetera. And I think a lot more people would be better off if they kind of implemented that, and maybe every weekend or every other weekend went out and camped and, swam a river or sat by a tree, et cetera, because that's really what is most natural to us. And that's where we feel most clear-headed and most at home, even though a lot of us are used to city life.
And even though, it might be a mirage, the forest exists and the ocean exists and the desert exists. Somehow it appears to be a common human experience that when we get out into that more natural environment, that it seems to have a positive effect on us.
Yeah, absolutely.
I recently experienced this myself. Right now I'm living in Guadalajara, which is a huge city in Mexico. And a year ago, I was living in Puerto Vallarta, which is a smaller city, which is between the oceans and the mountains and surrounded by jungle. Like, it's extremely biodiverse and lush. And I just went back for a long weekend. And when I was there, I felt so healthy, like just breathing more natural air, sitting by the ocean, and also being in a place where it felt like the earth was just exploding with life. Being in the rainforest and the jungle where there's just plants and animals everywhere. It felt like it was a place where life is supposed to be in a very primal kind of way. And it was quiet. I need that reset more often. I didn't realize how much I was lacking that.
Yeah, I live in the middle of a city right now, in the middle of Houston. I'm definitely looking forward to making a move and trying to get a little bit closer to nature, a little bit to a place that's a little bit more quiet. And even to getting to where I'm sleeping closer to the ground. I'm about 4 or 5 stories up here in my apartment. And, you know, when you're close to the ground, you're getting a lot of those ground energy waves for your sleep patterns, which I think is actually somewhat important. But when you're higher up, you're a lot more susceptible to all the EM fields just kind of flying around. And I've got some power lines running next, like literally 30 meters from my window. So I'm not sure if that's really great for sleep. I mean, I seem to be sleeping okay, but you know, maybe it's not a problem, but you know, maybe all those EM fields could affect your sleep and everything. It seems like sleep is so integral for health. It's kind of interesting. You know, we talk about getting back to the silence, you know, the meditation. I think it's really cool how sleep, you know, for at least a couple hours there, it's kind of like a pure silence. It's like a daily return back to sort of the nothingness, back to a space of pure potential.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I really like my house right now. It's very, very quiet at night, and actually another thing that helps with sleep and relaxation is supplementing melatonin. I guess that's like a complete change of subject, but melatonin is like the opposite of serotonin. It like puts you to sleep, and I think it puts you into, like, I feel way more refreshed the next morning whenever I have it. So if you guys have trouble falling asleep or you think the quality of your sleep is not very good, I recommend melatonin.
How much do you take? Do you take it every night, or do you just only do it when you're having problems sleeping?
Yeah, I take it when I want to wake up early the next morning, and I want to fall asleep quickly and have good restful sleep. So I've been taking it maybe like 50% of the time, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, it's good stuff. But I guess we kind of drifted in topic here. Do you guys want to go back to kind of talking about like hive minds, and or do you want to? Do you think we're going to a good spot here?
I had some ideas going back. I was thinking about, when we were talking about something before, I was thinking about on this LSD trip I had. And this isn't, I don't think this is exactly how it happened on the trip, but this is how I visualized it afterwards. It was kind of like I was out of this world, and this being was saying, "Hey, check this out. This is how things work down there." And he had this sort of machine, and this big old machine, like it looked like it ran on pneumatics or something. And he would take a single capsule, and he says, like, "See this? This contains all of your life from birth to death, this tiny little pod. And you just put it in the machine and like pull the lever, and that's you living your life." The ultimate point of this was like, you think we have this tendency to associate the self with the things we wear, how we look, our style, our mannerisms, all this sort of thing. But this being was telling me, no, all that stuff, that's just trivialities. He said, that can be changed in a moment. Your entire history, your entire life's history could be rewritten, and you wouldn't even know. So don't get too hung up on that stuff.
Great advice.
Yeah. And the other thing I was thinking about was every experience we have is a thought, or it's like a thought. So the tendency when we see things, we like assume that these things are solid, and the solidness, the solidity of something comes before the thought, but there's no way we can really prove that. And it could work just as easily the other way, because I see this thing, and that's my experience is basically a thought. Like, it's very difficult to to think, to have a definition of a thought that doesn't somehow include experiences.
Yeah. And I was just going to say, and again, quantum mechanics says that observing a thing collapses the wave function, which actually converts it from what it was previously, which was a superposition of things, into, after you observe it, it becomes this definite thing. And so
Can I just,
I've always thought about how observing, like just the act of observing the universe, you're actually changing the universe. Anyway, sorry to interrupt. So
I'm just going to throw in a skepticism of that. If to be the party pooper, I know it's been great. Having a great run. I felt like I was doing acid. So this is from.
What are you trying to do? Give us a bad trip, man?
I'm gonna give you guys a bad trip. So this is from David Robinson. He sent me a link the other day to a different experiment where they try to recreate this double slit experiment, and they had completely different results. And so the one that you guys hear about, like you try to find one that is not like a 3D version of the experiment, and you have a really hard time finding one. And part of one of the critiques of this experiment is that the only way to measure which slit the particle went through is to put some kind of barrier in between. Well, you put a barrier in between because measurement, you have to have some way of measuring the movement of matter over distance. So if you put a little barrier, well, maybe the barrier is too big and it actually blocks the thing. So you're interfering in order to measure the path in a sense. Basically, It's just a bad experiment, right?
Right, exactly. The act of measuring reality changes reality.
Depending on what the measurement is.
Depends how you measure. It depends how you observe.
And this has always kind of bothered me when hippies talk about quantum physics. And I love being a hippie and talking about quantum physics, but it's not that the double slit experiment and quantum physicists are saying that by measuring something you change the nature of it. They're not referring to human consciousness observing it and like the phenomenon interacting with consciousness changing the nature of the thing. They're referring to the fact that like any way that they have of measuring the phenomenon is you have to introduce like a physical measurement.
Oh, but in some cases they do go that far. I've read some interpretations where they do specifically say that, but I'm not a.
Yeah, I agree with Kurt. So there are lots of different ways that you can measure the effects of quantum mechanics. Another one is measuring the spin of an electron. You can launch an electron into a magnetic field. And well, I guess I guess it's kind of true that like any way that you're going to try to measure something, you're going to have to, as I guess as Juan was saying, like you kind of have to put something physical there that's going to physically change it. But so I guess what I'm saying is, so there's you can launch an electron into a magnetic field to see which way it's spinning. If it's spin up, it'll spin one way, and if it's spin down, it'll spin the other way. And if you don't measure it, it's a superposition of both. And then the act of measuring it causes the wave function to collapse such that it's either spin up or spin down. And the way that my friend in college explained it to me is that if you leave the measuring device, measuring electrons or whatever, and you don't observe it, then the measuring device is actually in a superposition of having measured spin up and spin down. And only once you observe it, does it become one of those things.
I've read interpretations, or I've read experiments where they put a video camera. I read where they would put a video camera on the measuring device. So they would keep the measuring device turned on through the entire experiment. But the only way they would have of knowing whether it gave one result or another is to put a video camera on it. So what they would do is repeat the experiment with the video camera turned on or turned off, but the measuring device turned on the entire time. And the outcome was supposedly dependent on whether or not someone actually came later and watched the video, as if the light particles or electrons actually knew whether or not a human was going to observe the result later, even though the measuring device was plugged in the entire time and turned on. Now, again, I read that, so that's secondhand information, right? Which is why I place a lot of value on actually redoing some of these experiments. Like, if David Robinson's listening, like, mad respect for redoing the double slit experiment. Like, that's definitely on my list, my bucket list of things to do.
It's not that hard.
Yeah.
I definitely recommend.
There's a lot of like really particular things you have to get set up and set correctly. Like Juan was talking about, you have to get the barrier set up. You have to know what frequency of light you're using. You have to have some pretty sensitive equipment to be able to just shoot one quanta, just one light particle or just one electron. And there's like different ways you can do it, where you can have a mirror that reflects, 45 this way and 45 the other way. It's like there's a lot of really like particular things and ways you have to set it up to try and like make sure that the result you're trying to get at is the result that you're actually setting up.
Okay, I guess the version that I did didn't involve shooting one particle. It involved shining a laser on a couple of slits, and then you observe a wave pattern on the other side of the slits. So that's what the dual slit experiment is. On the one hand, you shoot a stream of particles and you get an interference pattern. On the other hand, what you do is you shoot one particle at a time. So you shoot, and then the detector will register a location where it hit. And you'll do this 100 times, 1,000 times. And even though you're only shooting one particle at a time, over the course of many iterations, you still end up with an interference pattern until you place a detector on one of the slits to determine which slit your particle went through. If you don't know which slit it went through, you'll get an interference pattern. But if you place a detector, suddenly you just get two bands of light instead of multiple bands of light.
Yeah, and that's the critique that the thing that the detector is interfering with the experiment. That's the critique. Like, you're putting a thing in the path, and so you're gonna get a different result.
Yeah, and
so, like, we're dealing with protons. It's like the smallest thing we know. So like to measure it and let it pass is not going to be a simple thing, right?
So I guess my earlier point was,
where do you put the detector? Sorry. Go.
I was going to say, my earlier point is maybe all acts of observation are actually acts of mutation of our environment, and there's no way around it.
I can give you one example that goes against that, and it would disprove your maybe.
All
so
right.
For about an hour of you guys talking, I was listening, and you guys didn't even know it, and there. The trippy conversation was really trippy. I jumped in, and it's
that doesn't prove
that. Sounds unlikely.
Totally does.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't, because you don't know what the conversation would have been like if you weren't listening, and we don't either. So
merely by measuring the conversation, you affected it.
Yeah, Juan.
Yeah.
We're Schrodinger's crypto hippies.
This is silly, but continue.
Well, your point was silly, Juan. You were asked silly questions.
Come on, like there. Okay, so let's say I there's a room, and then I tell Kurt to go and look. I put something in the room, and I tell Kurt to go in and look at the room, and then look at the thing, and then so now you know what's in the room. You leave, and then I tell somebody else to come and look in the room, and then they see what's the thing in the room. There's proof. You are like Kurt would be a witness that there was something in the room, even though the other person hadn't seen it yet. Right, so like it's
but the other person, Kurt would be in a superposition of states until Kurt told the person what the result was, and only then would the wave function collapse.
Yeah, no, lack of information about what's happening does not mean that. Yeah, it's a psyop, bro. It's like drugs. Lack of information about what's happening does not mean that something isn't happening. Okay, I will shut up and let you guys continue.
No, it's cool. I'm just being silly.
Yeah, I'm with Juan.
I don't know. I mean, I don't find it very beneficial to talk too much about the double slit experiment, because I'm like, okay, what are you going to do with that information? Things could possibly be very, very different if you weren't looking at them, but you have to look at them to interact with them. So what are you going to do? I mean,
so the takeaway is that every time you observe something, you're bifurcating reality into its two possible forms, and you're only going to end up in one of those, and your alter ego is going to end up in the other alternate reality.
So is the idea like the secret where we have to try to actively create our own reality? Is that the idea?
Yeah, I was wanting to go there too. Merely by the act of observing, self-reflection, meditation, silence, focus onto a thought, how much can that affect the physical reality towards purposeful manifestation? How much can we manifest? How much is already set where we sort of have to accept it? Where's that line, and how far can we take that?
I think it's so basically, since it's probabilistic, since you can't know which reality you're going to end up in, the only choice you really have is whether or not to do the observation. And so I think the act of or the strategy of trying to observe as many things as possible is kind of an exercise in personal individual empowerment. Like, you're basically just being like, okay, I'm going to observe as many things as possible, and therefore I'm going to turn as many things that are probabilistic in my universe into things that are deterministic.
I don't think it really quite works that way, even assuming like what we're saying is true about waveform collapsing. No, because the past is also probabilistic in this model. So when you look back at your memories, are your memories really what happened, or are they different universes memories?
No,
you don't know.
Too many layers of complexity, man. My brain just seg-faulted.
It's not like every memory that you have, it's actually memory of a past memory. So your only real memory of a past actual event is the first one. But every time you think about it afterwards, you're just remembering.
I mean, it is true that memories have been shown to be very mutable. People can be highly convinced that something occurred when it didn't.
Yeah.
So
here's a weird thing too. Like in the West, we kind of, a lot of us have this assumption like there was one correct past, and that was what happened. And, all of us have our own different versions, but we're all a little wrong. And that there was definitely, a factual history, one literal history. But when I was in Thailand, I asked my friend, oh, so how did this temple get founded exactly? And he said, well, there are a lot of different versions, and people were there. The people who were there, who are still head monks in the temple, they lived it, and they met the founder, Luang Por Yai, and they still have their own versions, and some of them are very contradictory, but nobody says somebody else's experience is wrong. And I guess this is, in a way, relates to the Buddhist mentality, but they're just very easygoing about it. So they say, yeah, well, you have your version of events and I have my version, and that's the way it is. And sometimes I visualize it like this, like we're at a point in a river, and we assume that there's maybe one river tracing back, one stream, but actually each of us could have our own individual streams to arrive at this point. And all we know is, well, we more or less know that we're here together in this one point, but we don't know, there could be many, many paths to this point. There's no reason why there would have to be one path to this point.
But, well, except for the fact that generally when I compare histories with people, they tend to coincide with my own history,
yes.
or at least like they can't be physically contradictory,
Well, sometimes people have like misinterpretations of the same events, or They look at it from a different perspective. Like part of the dilemma is that we have limited perspective, and there's stuff that is outside of our field of view, right? So let's say you have cancer and you feel a little bit sick, and you choose not to go to the doctor to get, like, checked out, right? Well, the fact that you choose not to see doesn't mean that you don't have something, and then maybe you do, and maybe it kills you, right? So there's things outside of our field of perception that will occur whether you look at them or not. Now, if you look at them, maybe you can change them, but if you don't look at them, they will keep moving in whatever direction and catch you off guard, basically.
Right, exactly. The act of observation is empowering, allows you to change.
It is, yeah. But that's through, like, the application of willpower, right? It's not the observation itself alone. It is the acquiring of knowledge of the thing, so that then you can do something, right? I mean, maybe in certain edge cases of physics, right? If you do an experiment in a certain way, you can change the result. But, like, in the human experience in general, it's like, okay, you observe, and then now you have the choice, and now you have the information to act, but you have to act, or speak it, or verbalize it, or communicate, or do something about it. I mean, even if you don't do anything about it, it'll have changed your mind about it. But, anyway, yeah.
I think Orwell had a really good quote about somebody who controls the present controls the past. Who controls the past controls the future, or something like that.
Yes.
So it's definitely true that regardless of the various tributary streams that all came together to this one confluence here, that whoever happens to be in control of I guess like physical reality, whoever has the most physical power can tend to affect the history to a large and disturbing extent a lot of times.
So does this make gaslighting a viable means of rewriting history, of effectively rewriting history?
Yes, this is why gaslighting
exactly
and it'll
this is why people do gaslighting, because it works.
Yeah. Well, this is something I've been thinking about lately in the last few months. So I remember when the news started pushing that story about Alex Jones promoting hate speech, and you ask people, so all right, okay, so he did hate speech. Show me, where is it? Like, what did he say? Where did it come from? What was it about? Who was involved? Where? And they just, like, they have no idea. And it's,
but they're like, it's obvious. Clearly, Alex Jones is
it's mind-blowing. And it's basically like, it's like the media has just said something 10 times, and then it just gets dug into the brain, and there's no way they can avoid it. And I'm like, is that really all it takes? Like these are intelligent people.
Yeah, that's a well-studied phenomenon in marketing.
I think it is all. I mean, think about, there's tons of things that are completely subjective that feel just as true as facts. Like aesthetics is something I've been thinking about a lot, how something really seems ugly or seems beautiful, and fashion is a great example of this because it changes throughout time and people have very strong opinions about it.
Yeah.
And it feels just right, like this looks good or this looks bad, and it feels just as real as anything else, but it's only based on what we're observing and what we like in that moment, and it's
what's
completely
familiar.
cool. And I think that I don't see any reason why our brains work differently when it comes to artistic tastes and beliefs and ideas. I think we're just incredibly mutable.
And like facts about physical occurrences.
Yeah.
So we could tell people that
like
Alex Jones had sex with the pig on the national nightly news 10 times, or
if enough people said it enough, I think it would get written in history. Well, maybe not written down in.
Yeah, I mean, just look at the official story of 9/11. I mean, once you start really like going down the rabbit hole on this, you're like, oh wait, this cannot possibly be true. And yet, what is it, like 85% of the population or it's probably less than that now. I think it's slowly going down as the internet slowly figures it out.
Yes.
But you know.
Yes. Well, there's definitely
it's still the official story, even though it's physically impossible.
I have a lot of trouble with this myself, with like the BTC7 collapsing, even though it wasn't hit. Like there's part of me very deeply that believes that it makes perfect sense that it collapsed. But like, if I step outside of that event, like, no, it doesn't make any fucking sense.
No, and look at the way it fell. It's like obviously a controlled demolition. But the news media are just like, yeah, of course, you know, it got hit by a scrap from the Twin Towers. Just came
Is that the official story? What? I've never heard the official story. I don't even know what the story is.
Yes, that's the official story.
The official story in my head is that, like, it just got so hot that it just melted. And
no, WTC7 did not get hit by an airplane.
I know, but
so the official story is not yes,
debris and just heat made it.
The official story is literally
and the furniture burned.
Debris from World Trade Centers 1 and 2 collapsing, which it like hit this on one of the floors or something like that, and it hit these key columns, you know, like in exactly the right spot, and then it collapsed in free fall exactly into its own foot, exactly through the path of greatest resistance. And people fucking believe it.
Wow.
Yeah, have you seen that video where it's like, this is an orange? How many times, if I told you it was an apple, how many times would I have to tell you for you to believe me? And then it shows WTC7 falling. And how many times?
So I think that humans are very sensitive to the reality, the objective reality, which is it's basically a consensus about objective reality that their minds come to a conclusion about based on the proportion of people that believe, you know, which side of the story.
And also how
like social pressure. Yeah.
Because it's not just the proportion of people, it's the proportion of people and how much we trust the people who.
Right. Tribal things.
Exactly. And so I think reality to a very large degree, to a much larger degree than most people suspect, is actually based on sort of power. It's based on, you know, am I going to be in trouble for believing this thing? Can I be safe by holding a belief that everybody else holds? I think a lot of the things that we hold to be true, you know, even things that are scientifically proven or whatever, people hold mainstream views because that's what their brains are telling them is true based on what everybody else has formed a consensus around.
I suppose one way that I look at it is
kind of
I believe that there is an objective reality external to myself. It does exist, but my personal perception, the truth of like how well have I observed that external reality, always has some sort of associated uncertainty. I might be 99.999% sure that some event occurred, but because it occurred external to my perception and I had to interpret it through the medium of, you know, all kinds of systems, there's a level there that perhaps it wasn't as I observed it. Perhaps my observation can be explained by some very unlikely but still possible alternative explanation.
Right, and perhaps other people observed that phenomenon better than I did.
Yeah.
What about this? Do you guys ever read that article about kek and meme magic?
Juan,
yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, you all know.
Amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. That was really crazy and clever and creative. But that's you know, I guess that's a thing because it's like the mainstream media has been using these principles for a long time to manipulate us, but it turns out people can just use them back now on the internet and make a whole bunch of memes and change reality a little bit, or change how people think, and then change the consequences of that.
Yeah.
Well, and it's fascinating because it wasn't like somebody like plotted it, right? It came out of 4chan, which is an anonymous forum where people can create anonymous accounts and comment things. and they have a long history of cultural, like being attacked in many different ways. And they've survived the attacks to the point where the attackers don't try those things anymore because they've already built enough defenses culturally and the technology around it.
Yeah.
And so like they have spam protection systems, and then they have like this culture of calling scammers or chills. And so somehow they've managed to keep this to create a stable system among pure anonymity. And out of that came out this series of coincidences around the green frog, and this narrative started to get built. And sometimes it had to do with numerology, because every post has like its own numerological string, and they have like numerology games and stuff, and sometimes the coincidences were crazy. And so like this narrative around the green frog started to get built collectively among a bunch of people. And then suddenly got a little bit too big for any one person to say that it's just because like you don't know, right? Like it's just a thing that everybody kind of, has sort of heard or seen or right. It's fascinating.
What I love about it too is like Kek is supposed to be the god of chaos, or he's like the border between chaos and order. That's why he's an amphibian, because it's like partly in the water, which is like the subconscious, and partly on the earth. And 4chan is kind of the same. So that's 4chan it's on the internet. It's this place of like you can go in there, and you're sort of like entering the subconscious, because it's all these things that are repressed and can't get expression anywhere else. But it's also on the internet, and it's right there in broad daylight. So where, if you were a god of the chaos or the border chaos order god, then where would you want to express?
This is where mythology comes from.
Where what? Mythology?
Yeah, mythology, and like Jordan Peterson talks about like archetypes, and these things that we associate with other things. Maybe in 1,000 years, the green frog and Kek will be associated with the border between order and chaos.
Well, it was in Egyptian times, and
they have before. Yeah.
Okay, I guess I missed that part. Okay, cool.
Yeah,
so the
symbology. You read the article about Kek and mean magic.
I've read around it. I don't think I know the specific article you guys are talking about.
Okay.
Yeah, you can find it out. So like the meme, the symbols of the frog as the creature that transcends between the various dimensions. It's the symbols are built into the creature. Like they're built into the animal, right? Like the animal embodies those principles, which is why throughout a long period of time, it shows up associated with that animal. Probably not the only animal. If you go to a place where there's no green frogs, they'll have a different one, right? But the motif, I guess, or whatever, is sort of a consistent thing of something that can transcend. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think it's important for the health of society, our own individual mental health, and society at large, that we occasionally venture into that chaos, that there is an outlet for some of those dark thoughts, for our dark side, because all of us have a dark side. And I think one of the things plaguing our current society from a psychological perspective is the repression of those thoughts, is the repression of that chaos and subconscious, as if denying its existence would make its existence go away. Particularly for the left, I think this is something I see that they want to deny the existence of it, and they want to shut down all manifestations, all explorations of this sort of darkness, of this consciousness, and it leaves them in a place where they actually manifest that darkness in other ways, because they haven't sort of responsibly explored it. They haven't acknowledged that it exists. They haven't looked inside. Maybe not. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of that going on both sides of the equation. But it's not an easy thing to explore your darkness without letting it get the better of you from time to time.
Well, and the interesting thing about that to me is that kind of in my mind, the way that it archetypally works is that the right is kind of order and the left is kind of chaos. And so it kind of...
or like logic and creativity, or logic and empathy.
Sure, yeah, exactly. So it would surprise me that people on the left were denying the existence of chaos or something, or trying to fight against chaos, because that seems like their thing.
I would say like discipline and consistency as opposed to creativity and disruption. That's how I kind of
Yeah, maybe that the left sort of exhibits these characteristics of chaos through their actions because they haven't given sort of a mental outlet for that sort of chaotic darkness that exists within. So because they don't have an outlet in the form of like 4chan, like probably not too many leftists go visit 4chan or the dark recesses, of the internet. So because they don't have an outlet for that somewhere, they actually manifest it physically through their actions.
I think there are leftist anonymous communities online. I think there's fairly large ones on Reddit, at least that I know of. Facebook.
Yeah, this is pure speculation on my part. It might be totally wrong.
Well, there is some correlation maybe between economic status and political status. So like one of the theories that I've heard a lot that makes sense is that the more wealth, like hard times make strong and rigid men that think, and people that think really far ahead, and then they think in that way for a long time, and that creates very strong foundations, and from that a lot of wealth emerges, and then people that are born in that wealth, they don't have those strong pressures, and so they can create art and do all kinds of crazy things, but they don't have that experience that makes them think about the long-term consequences of things, or they're much more concerned with the now and the suffering of maybe and they're wealthy, so they're suffering. They're very concerned with the poor, and like they just want to, right? So it changes the priorities, and so they just basically like tend to have a temptation to just go through the wealth, and then and potentially like shake the foundations, and often enough it breaks the foundations, and then you get hard times again, and the cycle repeats, right? And so you'll probably get people on the left that are like at the bottom of the hierarchy and at the top of the hierarchy, and then in the middle of the hierarchy you'll get the people that are rising, right, or like hustling and stress. And it doesn't mean that either is wrong exactly, because the artists are the ones that create the art that reminds us of stuff that happened millions of years ago or thousands of years ago. Like in Prague, the architecture is unbelievable and makes you really remember, or like just it makes me like amazed at the beauty that was possible at some point, that like we don't see buildings that pretty anymore. Right. So art, there's something great about just, we have a bunch of wealth, let's create some beautiful stuff, right? That's totally fantastic, and it's not the only thing that's great about creatives, but that's the
and not only that, but groundbreaking kind of ideas that push things forward.
Yeah.
Like I tend to think of artists and creatives and entrepreneurs as being very similar types of people.
Yeah, entrepreneurs are definitely creatives. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, so people that innovate and create new systems and find new solutions to suffering and other things and stuff.
One thing that's been interesting to me lately in looking at the right and the left is I think it's kind of like the stereotypes that I have about left-wing people and right-wing people are kind of getting shaken up a little bit. It seems like, well, the alt-right or the new right to me doesn't, like when I think about the average 4chan user, I'm not imagining like a physically fit, conservative family kind of man, I'm imagining, 4chan is very creative and very disruptive, and it almost seems more like left type personality, but with right-wing views. Does anybody else see that? I don't really know how to expand into this.
Yeah, I guess so, but it's so chaotic, and there's so many people, there's so many boards on there, like there is even like /fit, and there's 100 things.
I think a lot of what can maybe explain that is that when people feel disempowered, when people feel maybe they're not in the best shape, maybe they're not very attractive, maybe they didn't have a privileged upbringing, maybe they live in their mother's basement, maybe they're not having much success in life, and they feel oppressed, maybe. I think what's happening, and this could be blamed on either side, but a lot of people are saying that the left has kind of exacerbated this problem, is the issue of identity politics. And so when people feel oppressed, a lot of times they seek out their group affiliations in order to, their tribes basically, in order to advance their cause and advance their position in society. So I think a lot of what you're seeing is you're seeing people playing identity politics. And when that gets scary is when, white people play identity politics. Because basically
when the majority plays identity politics.
Sure, when the majority plays identity politics. And I think what you're seeing is well, the left has been playing identity politics so long. We're talking about, Black people, Asians, Mexicans, people, minorities, gay people, transsexual people, all of these minorities are being oppressed because they're minorities, and so they've been playing identity politics, and they've been kind of using that group affiliation in order to advance their position in society. And so a lot of people who are sort of members of the majority group, but feel oppressed, feel like, well, why can't we do the same thing? And I think that's kind of dangerous territory for us to be in.
Coming back to our topic of conversation, I think it's a very interesting consciousness trap where all of these people who are playing identity politics, they're really trying to show off their individuality as much as possible. They're trying to say, I'm different, I'm an individual, this is who I am, I'm a human being, pay attention to me, respect me, etc. But then as soon as that becomes a little bit difficult and, going out there and putting yourself out there and being vulnerable in front of other people is a very scary thing. And to be truly an individual, you have to take those risks and you have to kind of show your honest self, to the world. Like the Japanese say, we wear 3 different masks. One, the way that we interact with our family, one that we show the world, and one that we don't show anybody but ourselves. And sometimes a lot of us don't even show ourselves that kind of that version of us. And then so this consciousness trap goes into where it's really hard to be vulnerable and completely radically honest with everybody and really show all of your flaws and all of your good sides. And then all of a sudden there's the hive mind, and they kind of fall into this hive mind, and it does become really dangerous because they're trying to be the individual, but they're trying to also be part of this collective. And I think a lot of those ideas kind of get skewed and confused through this process and comes out as this identity politics game on the other side.
Yeah, we talk about the self, we're kind of exploring what is consciousness, who am I, what is the self. Too many times identity politics causes people to mistake their true self and then they substitute some other superfluous thing. I'm a Republican or a Democrat, I'm a nationalist or a socialist, and then instead of identifying ourselves as being consciousness, like inherently being a point of observation and self-reflection, we've lost who we really are and substituted for something else that gives us maybe temporary meaning, but sort of detracts from our experience as humans, our ability to perceive beauty, our ability to perceive the world as it really is, and it becomes skewed by these identity politics. And
our ability to be happy with who we are instead of trying to become something that we're not, just to please and fit in with the people around us. And I think we're seeing a lot more cases come out of people who may have bought into the identity politics game and decided that maybe they were so different that they weren't the gender that they really are, right? And all of a sudden now, years later, they're like, wow, this is the worst mistake I've ever made. I'm actually am the gender that I am. And there's more and more cases coming out with that. And I think that's part of that identity politics of trying to, like Anthony said, like be someone that you're not. And then realizing that actually, whoops, who you are is who you are. And you just maybe didn't take the time to really discover it and put it up front and be judged for it. Because that's the scary part, being judged for who you really are.
Yeah, exactly. Like it takes a lot of courage to put yourself in front of a lot of people, as you guys have been saying, and I think a lot of people are feeling threatened, and when you feel threatened, you kind of retreat into yourself and you kind of take on the aspects of the groups that you're a member of, rather than it kind of makes you feel more secure. But the longer you do that, the weaker you get, and the more dependent on those groups you are. And so, yeah, we need to encourage people to kind of renew themselves periodically and go on that hero's journey, and go out, strike out courageously into the unknown, and bring back that knowledge for the benefit of all.
Yeah, well, that's the thing that made me think about that as well when Juan was talking about good times make soft men or whatever, about how there's no rite of passage for people these days, and people don't really. I think a lot of people these days don't know when they've become an adult. Everybody feels like like they're just big kids. There's no cleaving. There's no set point when you finish childhood, and there's not even a house and a stable job either. And so everybody needs to go out into the desert and do peyote. That's my point.
You know, in a lot of ways, or in some ways, I think that can almost be a good thing. That people are like, hey, you know, I'm not really fully an adult, and maybe none of us should ever become fully adults. Maybe we should all retain some childlike qualities to an extent. You know, not.
Don't let your soul die.
Yeah. What does it mean to be an adult? I know as a kid, I kind of had this concept that I was in this childlike learning process, and then someday I was gonna get there, and it would just be kind of stasis. Like I would have the knowledge and I would just be living life successfully. I couldn't say that explicitly, but that's kind of the concept that I had of adulthood. Is it's when you've figured it out and now you're acting out what you should be acting out.
So I guess we've all learned that you never end. Like learning things is a lifelong journey.
Yeah.
As a kid.
Well, so I actually have been feeling a little bit more like an adult recently. It's been definitely, you know, obviously a lifelong process, but I reached these kind of, you know, when you're hiking a mountain, you know, and you're trying to get to the top, you know, you get to these false summits where you're like, okay, I'm gonna go there, and then you get there and you're like, sweet, I made it. Oh, but there's a place even higher. I guess I'll just sit here and enjoy it for a moment, and then I'll strike out for that even higher point. And I think very recently, I've been feeling like I've been doing this thing called GTD. It's getting things done, and it's like this system for, it's like an operating system. It's like a human operating system. It's like this way that I can look at all of the different threads that I have in my life and keep track of all of them and move forward on all of them. And before I had that, I felt very adrift. I felt like, you know, basically whenever I encountered somebody else who had a stronger will than me, I basically just went with whatever they were doing. And so it would knock me off my course, and then I'd be like, oh, you know, I wish I hadn't done that. You know, and then I'd pull myself back on, but now I feel like I can kind of keep track of this kind of like main thread of my life, and I can move forward on it, and other people don't like throw me off it just by simply having a stronger system than me. So I feel like maybe that's one definition of being an adult, and I think another definition of being an adult, which is related, is that you trust your own emotions, like you trust your intuition. Like you trust that the actions that you do are going to be good for you, and if they're not, you'll be able to fix them and put yourself back on course. I think a few years ago, I felt very just very uncertain about what I wanted to do in life and where I wanted to go. And there were all these things that I wanted to do, and I felt like I needed to just kind of decide. And I guess, where was I going with that? Anyway, yeah, it's a lot about emotional maturity and trusting yourself, and trusting that your instincts are correct. What I was going to say is, basically I'd be worried to do something impulsively because I feel like I'd set myself back. But now when I do stuff kind of on intuition, I look back on what I did and I'm like, oh, that helped me, So I feel like that maybe is another definition of being an adult.
I do want to say that I think there is a difference between emotions and intuition, because I guess from personal experience, I could feel something, I could really want something, I could really like something, I could be very emotionally connected to it, but then my intuition will be like, no, you should do something completely different. And I think it's a very different, I don't even want to call it a feeling because I separate the two completely. I think it's some kind of internal maybe mechanism or internal energy that kind of guides you forward, and your emotions are separate from that because how you feel about something and what you should do are very different a lot of the times.
Right.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I've definitely noticed the same in myself that personally, oh no,
Anthony.
Pros.
And he's gone.
He was going to say something amazing and genius.
I know, right? I agree with you though. Also, I don't think, I don't trust my emotions. I trust my emotions as a piece of data, and then they're part of what I use to make decisions about what I want to do. Because I don't want to do things that are so disaligned with my emotions that I'm miserable, but I also know that your emotions kind of adapt to the situations that you put yourself in, and you can learn to like new things over time. Like there are a lot of things that, like for example, if you're in a relationship that you know isn't good for you, it's going to feel bad to break up, and you know it's going to feel bad to break up, but you know you're going to feel better later. It's just, your emotion is, in that case, it's the withdrawal, or I don't know, you know that it's going to feel good in the moment emotionally to eat some shitty sugary thing because it's doing all kinds of things in your brain. But I don't know, emotions are valuable, but they're only one.
Well, and I think a large part of the process of becoming an adult is recognizing when your emotions are telling you something frivolous and they should ignore, and when they're telling you something more important, they're pushing you towards a particular action which is going to help you out.
Right. Yeah.
It's just a lot of it's just life experience. A lot of it's just how many times have you had those emotions in how many different situations.
And I just want to clarify, I don't think your emotions are ever frivolous. It's always telling you useful information. Right. At the very least, it's telling you have some kind of strong emotional reaction to this thing. Like, why do you have an emotional trigger with this sentimental object from years ago or something like that? It's always useful, but it's not necessarily steering you where you want to go.
Yeah. Exactly.
Anthony, you ever have intuitions that are dead wrong? Where it's like, my intuition tells me to do this, and that was like totally wrong.
I've never, ever had my intuition tell me that. I think that's an emotion, right? Because my intuition has never steered me wrong. It's mostly moments of like, shit, I had that feeling or that intuition, but I totally didn't go that way, and now everything's fucked up. Damn it, why is that?
But also,
but how do we know?
Don't we kind of always trust our intuition? I don't know, when we're looking back on things and deciding if it was the right thing or the wrong thing to do, isn't it our intuition that we're taking to evaluate that? It's
kind of like what people talk about with God, like when it leads you to something good, that was God, and when it leads to something bad, you weren't listening properly, and it was really telling you something else. You thought it was telling you that thing that you did, which ended up being a mistake. And I think
what about this?
It's often like that.
Here's something I just thought of. I'm not entirely sold on this idea, but I'll throw it out there and see what you think. So I think sometimes when your emotions tell you to do something, and it's like an addiction or something that'll make you feel comfortable or whatever, it tends to be very loud. But sometimes when your intuition tells you to do something, it tends to be a very soft voice, and you have to be quiet within yourself to hear it, and it can even make you uncomfortable. Like you can even think, oh, I don't know if I want to do that.
and you have to exercise restraint, because a lot of times simply waiting before doing the action will allow you to listen to those deeper, quieter, oftentimes more intelligent voices inside your head.
Another part of it is, at least the way I think about it, intuition is kind of a voice that's telling you something. Maybe it's the more rational part of you, but emotions are actually, in kind of a literal way, they're drugs, they're feelings that are in your body and making you, they're making you experience the world in a different way, which is it's much louder and more immersive than.
No, I totally agree. I conceptualize emotions as sort of being chemically based.
Yeah.
But I do have to say that, like, your intuition doesn't always guide you to the best place in the short term. Like, I've had experiences where I'm like, I know I have to do this, and it just fucking sucks, and it's really, really terrible. And I'm like, God damn it, why am I doing this? But like, something is like pushing me to make that decision, and then I make that decision, and it seems really bad for a while. And then in hindsight, you're like, no, that was totally the right decision. Because no matter what what feelings you go through, when you look back, you're like, okay, well, now, like, and over time, you kind of start to understand why that decision would be better for you in the long term, versus the kind of like middle shit show that you have to deal with right after you make it.
And I totally agree with that. And I would add that, like, to me, like sometimes, actually pretty much all the time, the stuff that I do is like, I can't really explain it at the time. And then later, if it seems like having regrets to me never really seemed to be very useful, because you can always use the decision that you made to give you momentum towards something that's greater. Even if in the short term you ended up losing something or maybe having some negative emotions or something like that, you still ended up in a place that you wouldn't have been in, and so you can use that to your advantage. You can turn it around into something that's positive. So to me, like, basically, I never regret decisions that I make. I'm just like, okay, I decided to do that, so now I'm going in this direction.
Yeah.
That was my motto in high school, and I've just picked it up over the years, and I'm like, yep, I don't have regrets. And it's been a really great model, I have to say. So if you haven't used it yet, do try it out.
Yeah, and I think that's where that kind of, like, you could be like, it's God, it's God's voice just telling me to do stuff, and it's always right, because I never regret anything that it tells me to do. And if I do regret it, then that means that I wasn't listening to it.
I mean, there's something you should probably regret, don't steal and don't hurt other people, and if you do, you should probably regret doing that. And there's the whole thing of forgiveness. Like, when you hurt somebody, you do that. That's like when your emotions, like,
right. Yeah, the only time that I've regretted something is when I did something without thinking about it first, and without thinking about what's my intuition on this. And just being like, okay, I'm going to do this. But those things tended to be very minor things. For the big decisions, I tend to take a long time, and I tend to really, really consider all of the options and the pros and cons.
Can I tell you guys 2 experiences that I had recently that are very related?
What do you have on your head?
What do you mean?
Thinking of bad decisions.
What are you talking about?
What did your intuition say about putting that thing on your cranium?
Just kidding.
My emotions feel very, very red right now, right around my forehead. That's just an intuition, though.
Does that mean you're angry or hungry?
Both.
Or passionate.
I want to go with hungry.
Fire up Juan's brain mobile. He's
I'm containing my brain power.
So sorry I interrupted you, Juan. What were you going to say?
Yeah, so I recently built a house in Colombia, because my mom's house was like falling apart, and so during the moon I was like, okay, let's just build a house. So I threw some money at it and I built the house, and it's actually fucking built now. Like, there's a house in Colombia now that's like pretty much it's my house, and we had the land and stuff. And like, shit, I should be quieter. So, like, of all the things that I've been doing in the past years, and all the crypto things that I've been doing, there's a very peaceful kind of satisfaction in this. Like, it's very deep satisfaction. Like, okay, that I needed to do. it just kind of like puts everything into order in a sense. Like it sort of aligns a lot of things. But it's been really kind of surprising in a sense to see how satisfying it is, in a very sort of calm kind of like, that was good. I've done something meaningful. I've done something good here. And this question of this question of adulthood, right? Like, what does it mean to be an adult? I think it was Nathan Freeman that said to me the other day that, or like a couple of years ago, that you become an adult. Well, it was about manhood. What does it mean to be a man? It's like you become a man when you have kids, and you now have to like be responsible for other people. And it doesn't mean you actually have to like physically have kids, but you can, when you adopt responsibility for other people, like beyond yourself and adopt it for other people, then that's like, that's another level. But, you know, not that I do that often, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so going back to your first experience, there's definitely been times in my life, as you were saying, where you just feel like you need to do something, and you feel like it's going to move you forward in life, and you don't really know why, and you can't really explain it to anybody, but you know that you have to do it. And then you do it, and then you figure out why you needed to do it, and you feel better. And I think a lot of people would say like, oh, that's kind of a divine voice, the voice
Probably
of God, like inside your head.
Dropping you a hint.
Yeah, exactly. Like, here, do this thing. And I'm not going to tell you why right now, but you'll figure it out once you do it.
Or don't do this thing.
Yeah.
Or
Right.
maybe
I used to like doing this. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I was going to say maybe we should stop looking at our decisions as being right or wrong. I kind of like the way that you were talking about it earlier. Well, this is the decision I made, and here I am now. And when we're looking back and trying to make sense of things and saying, oh, this crazy seeming, totally wrong seeming decision actually was right because this, maybe we're not seeing how it was right, but we're just seeing how that butterfly effect took place and caused some of the things that we really like about ourselves now. Yeah. And I think that that's a good perspective to take. I try not to regret. I try to look at it as, okay, here I am. This is all the knowledge that I've gained. What's the best that I can do from this point? Because I can only do things from this point. And that doesn't mean not looking back, but trying to go back and say, should I have made this decision? Should I not have made this decision? Is only useful to me insofar as making decisions in the future and whether I want to follow those same patterns going forward.
And each decision that you make is selecting between infinitely many different realities. And it may be that like it's you can imagine that some other reality that I'm not in because I didn't take that action at that time. To me, it's kind of just not even worth thinking about because every time you make any decision at all, you're bifurcating reality into the one that you end up in and all of the other ones that you never visit. So, to me, there's kind of an infinite complexity effect where it's just too much to even think about,
no more drugs for Chris. Sorry.
I just
it's just not worth it to even consider.
Realities is really
it's irrelevant, right? Because you were in the reality that you chose, and
so it's only worth it to think about that reality because that's the only one that I chose.
And none of those things even exist. The only thing that exists is right now. Like the future doesn't exist yet. The past doesn't. Maybe they do already exist. I don't know. And our consciousness is just on this point of the timeline. But maybe they don't exist at all. And the only thing that does exist, the only choices that can be made are the ones that are in this moment.
Yeah.
It's kind of like there's a lot of stuff to be worried about. There's a lot of stuff to fear, but that worry, that fear won't change them. So the best thing we can do is observe, reflect, and listen to the silence, to make the best decisions we can in this moment right now.
And act with confidence in the direction that the silence tells us to go in.
Well, the fear might help if you listen to it and try to address it and confront it. You don't want to just ignore your fears or your concerns. Like they're trying to tell you something, but
right. But commit is what I'm saying.
It's not good, huh? Yeah.
Like act with confidence. Like, yes, listen to your fear, but don't let the fear control you. You know, don't let it.
Mm-hmm.
Don't let it prevent you from acting. I guess is what.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Well, just listen to its message, right? Like you don't want to build the rules around fear, right? Listen to its message and then act consciously around the information, right? So if a dragon's coming at you, you want to run, right? Like if there's a lion at you, right? But if it's like it's a mouse, then you're okay, right? You just got to look at it, right?
There have been certain situations in my life where I've just had this deep-seated fear. I know I'm talking about in-the-moment situations, and I started to think, well, Katy, you're totally overreacting. This guy, maybe he isn't that creepy, and you're just like blowing things way out of proportion. But it's like in those kinds of situations, just listen to your fear, because the cost of not listening to my fear and getting out of that situation would be much higher if my fear was correct than the potential cost of, I don't know, making somebody feel uncomfortable or slightly embarrassed because I ditched them.
Right, and so acting with confidence in that situation would be, you know, listening to yourself and getting out of that situation.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of truth to that. There's a lot of value in that. You know, listen to your emotions, listen to your instincts, observe the fear that it exists, and then act in a way, you know, to move the direction that you would like to move, that you think is best. But when able, you know, not to let the fear consume you regularly. You know, like in the moment, you might be fearful of the bear and run away. But to remain fearful of bears, you know, for the rest of your life, it might not be the, you know, the best mentality, even if you can intellectually take the proper steps, you know, to protect yourself.
Bears are tasty, and it's worth confronting them. Just saying.
Hey, Russian. Have you eaten a bear, Anastasiya, since you've been in Russia?
Oh my gosh, so much. Like every day while we were up north, and it was amazing. And it was the bear that my little brother got, and it was just like so cool. And we used a bunch of the other bear parts for like health reasons. And yeah, it was amazing. So good.
I don't suppose that you ate any of the organs like the heart or the liver.
No, those are already gone by that point. I ate the heart of all the birds. I got my first bird, and I ate its heart, and it was delicious.
I had a bird's egg hatch in a little nest that's right next to my shower.
You eat its heart?
I haven't eaten its heart, and I don't think that I will. Actually, like I'm so invested in this thing actually already.
I mean, if
I've had to like avoid taking showers to avoid scaring the parents away.
Like this is my thing as a hunter.
I use the other shower.
It's so tiny that you're not really gonna get a lot. Like I hate people who shoot squirrels. I'm like, you're not gonna eat it. You're not gonna use it. You're not gonna do anything with it. It's just like plain murder. You're just killing this poor little animal, right? But if it's something that can nourish your family and can sustain you biologically, then and you do it in a very conscious way, and you show gratitude towards that animal for everything that it gave you, and you try to use all of the parts. Like I brought a ton of feathers. Probably shouldn't be saying this on the internet. But I brought a ton of feathers back home from like the duck and the birds that we got to make earrings out of them. You know, so like if you do consciously and you show gratitude to nature for sustaining you and your family, that's one thing. You just shoot tiny little birds and then they're dead and then you don't do anything with it. That's like really fucked up, and you're probably like there's something probably wrong with your brain. You should get it checked out.
Okay, guys.
Okay, so here's the story.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been having this experience. I've had it like a few times in the past couple of years, and I would say like it was like the peak experiences. So the best things that I've done, like which is like, you know, like dots in a line, right? Like they're peaks and among valleys, right? But like the best things that I've done, it's almost like, so for example, like the debate with Roger Ver, like that I'm proud of that one, even though I could have probably done better, but I'm proud of it. And then I gave a little speech, like a 5-minute speech in front of like this DogeCon event, and it was kind of like a very kind of hardcore message in a sense, but it was, you know, I'll send you guys the link. And those to me were like the moments where I was doing the most meaningful thing I could be doing at the time. And it's the weird experience that I'm having around that is like, I look at it and it's almost like I have the same like instinctual reaction as when you're looking at the sun. It's like, it's too bright. and that's not to like pat myself in the back or anything, but it's I keep being reminded of the story of Icarus, when Icarus flies too close to the sun. You know, like why when we talk about how like enlightenment is good and you want to, you know, expand our awareness and expand knowledge and be the best that you can be. Why do then we have this story that warns us about the danger of flying too close to the sun? You know, why am I having this reaction of like, wow, that's really bright, like it's really peak experience, and it's almost like part of me, like half of me just wants to, okay, that was great, let's recoil a little bit and sort of, you know, retreat a little bit because it's too bright, you know, like you're just putting yourself in the middle of the like of a vortex. So yeah, I'm curious what you guys think about that and about this Icarus story.
I think there's one thing about the Icarus story is supposedly they don't tell this part anymore, but supposedly originally the story was Icarus's father says, don't fly too high, but also make sure you don't fly too low, because the fumes or the vapor from the water is going to get into your wings, and they're going to get wet, and then they'll fall apart and you'll fall into the water. So that's something that that doesn't come up a lot. So you have to, obviously you can't, well, if you don't use your talents, if you don't take advantage of the gifts that you have, that's a real danger as well, and people slip behind because of that. The other thing is, I think, well, I like to use that expression a lot, flying too high, but it's something that comes up. It's a bit of a strange subject when it comes to mental illness, I guess, because people get let's see, when people have these certain experiences, like something snaps in their brain, like maybe it's even a peak experience, but they get a little carried away with it, and they start to think they know more than they do. And that's what the real danger of flying too high is. I think it's like hubris. So it's not like having the peak experiences or being in bliss all the time. That's the problem. It's the things that go with it that we mistake for the peak experiences. That's the danger.
Sometimes I wonder about, people talk about enlightenment, and we talk about maybe good and evil and God or source, and the source which created the universe created both good and evil, apparently, which makes me wonder if it's kind of both good and evil, the source, like, is God also evil? And so if you're becoming what people might call enlightened, and you're starting to tap into manifestation and energies and things which seem to go beyond the ordinary everyday physical, I wonder about, is it possible to become enlightened and then be sort of evil enlightened, and then manifest pain and sorrow and suffering instead of joy and peace?
Wow,
I'm not sure
so far.
Well, there is
that one,
the dark enlightenment.
Dark,
Yeah, the left hand path versus the right hand path. So I think that's definitely possible. I'm not sure about God, but then there's also layers of where, here on this level, we might see that something is really good or something is really bad. But when we go above it and we go back to that theory of, consciousness and who we really are, and if this is just a video game or a dream where we're playing out and we're being actors and we're doing, like, trying out new things and experimenting and having these experiences, well, maybe that bad experience leads to something really good that person could have never learned if he didn't have that bad experience. And that's like one of those things where, people always say, like, well, if God was good, then little children wouldn't die. But there's cases where a child dies and it completely changes somebody's life, and makes it so much richer and so much more meaningful, so much better, just because they went through that really, really terrible experience of losing a child, right? And it's up to each individual whether they take that experience and, you know, just kind of like fall into a rabbit hole of negativity and depression and anger, or if they take that experience and learn something more compassionate, more loving, more positive out of it. And depending on where we're looking from, that bad experience could actually be good.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think in a lot of, at least like in the Bible, you know, it talks about how God can like lead you through kind of dark places, but in the end, it's leading you to somewhere, you know, brighter and more positive and more glorious than you would have ended up if you had not experienced that darkness. And just, you know, and just bringing it down just to like normal everyday experience. I mean, I think we can all point to sort of, yeah, like tough, difficult experiences that were, yeah, like maybe even sort of agonizing at the time, which made us better people and made life easier for us moving forward.
Yeah, I got one. When I got kicked out of Mexico, that was really tough. And being in the detention center, there's not a lot to keep someone entertained or anything. So I had to. It was a challenge to stay happy and positive. So that was a valuable experience. But also, looking back, it was like I'd been living in Mexico, and I was kind of, seems like I was taking it for granted. Like I really love Mexico, but I wasn't traveling as much as I should have, or, you know, exploring and finding out different facets of it. So, you know, it's like some weird. It's like a dungeon master forcing the story to move forward. The troll picks you up and throws you into the dungeon.
So you saw the silver lining to being kicked out of Mexico, which is that it made you appreciate the experience that you had in Mexico more.
Yes. But you know, I mean, yeah, I guess I can look back and I say, well, I'm just rationalizing it by saying that had to happen. But it doesn't really seem like there's any way around it. It's like my character arc or something. It had to have that. If I didn't have to, nothing would make sense now if that hadn't have happened. So
I know I'd be living in a different place actually if that hadn't happened to you. I'd possibly be living in Puerto Vallarta.
That's true. If that hadn't happened to you, I think
yeah.
Also.
Yeah.
You know, and if life was only sunshine and roses, maybe it would be a little bit boring. You know, maybe that would be its own kind of pain. You know, everything is perfect and there's never a challenge.
Yeah. Well, you know, yeah.
I wanted to go back really quick, if I could, to the idea of peak experiences and flying too close to the sun, and why that you get that fear when you're doing something very powerful. And I think it's a good thing. I think it's because when we're operating at our highest level, the stakes become extremely high. Like, this is both an analogy and literal. Think of yourself as a driver driving a car. It feels amazing to start driving extremely fast, but then also every turn you make or every bump that you hit is huge, and you could fly off the road and hit somebody. And when you're moving so fast, that's when it feels meaningful and you get that kind of wind in your hair kind of experience. But it's also where you could really do a lot of damage to yourself and others. And if you're playing on a very high field, something like a mistake that you might make as a regular person interacting with regular people, not having a ton of money, isn't going to have a major impact. You can't fall so hard, and also if you fall, it doesn't collapse the lives of a ton of people around you. But if you're operating at an extremely high level and you make a mistake or do something that has a lot of negative consequences, those consequences are enormous. So I think it's good to take a step back and say, am I really ready to be driving this fast? Am I really ready to be playing in this league?
Yeah,
Really good point.
That's great feedback.
It's good to have like humility, even in those situations where you're just flowing and you feel like you're accomplishing so much and you're just going super fast.
Mm-hmm. I think you can also flow straight into insanity, like Kurt was saying.
I mean, just look at Elon Musk.
Come on.
He's great.
Hate on him too much.
He's becoming more sane.
He's amazing.
He's going through a divorce. You know, he puts on his pants one leg at a time, just like us.
He's going through a divorce? Of course he's going through a divorce.
I thought he was
Like
dating.
his third divorce.
Yeah, I thought he had like girlfriends or whatever.
Well,
Was
he
he
could-
dating?
I think.
Maybe he's divorcing Tesla since, that kicked off.
Yeah. No, he's definitely been just like as you were saying, like hitting bumps and stuff, and
yeah, he's
but he
hitting
almost
bumps
seems-
that would be normal bumps for myself, or I don't know.
but he almost seems to be like just having fun with it. And
Yeah, he's having fun with it. He doesn't really care that
he's
much.
doing it to show people like actually I can do this and it doesn't matter. But maybe it will. Maybe he'll just go a little bit too far one of these days. I don't know. I hope.
Yeah, maybe he'll launch a Tesla car too close to the sun and it'll melt or something.
Maybe his BFR will go too close to the sun.
Yeah, he's gonna launch that Tesla with little wings on the side.
Yeah, wings made of wax and feathers.
Wow. Amen.
Well, guys, it's been a enlightening conversation.
Yes.
Informative.
Say that again.
Shit.
This is an amazing group. You guys are like genius level conversationists.
Thank you.
I'm like really psyched to get this group of people all together in one group.
Sorry we've been so bad at it.
Don't apologize. No regrets.
Traveling.
Anastasia. No regrets.
Yeah, no regrets. But still,
Everyone going to Anarchapulco next year?
absolutely.
Thinking about
Yeah.
it.
Me.
Yeah, that'll be we should definitely do a podcast from there.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can have the 2.0 of that thing that we did last year, you and me, Anthony.
Yeah.
We just get everybody drunk and we just talk about stuff.
We'll have,
Yes.
we'll have to do some heavy editing.
No, we can have like an offline talk there and no recorded, like fully private, we'll just go to the beach and have like a no mics, no cell phones talk.
That's
I love
what
that.
it is.
Those are
That's
good.
what it is right now.
Those are really good. No. This is like being recorded. Yeah.
Yeah, I can shut off the recording. I said I could shut off the recording.
It's still online and there's still phones and microphones. Like,
Yeah.
have you ever had a conversation when there's no recording hardware anywhere near you? Huh?
Yes.
No,
Yeah.
not
No,
really.
Yeah, in like
I
2000.
am recording hardware.
It could be interesting to have,
I am recording hardware.
although I feel like
Anthony is the Android. Okay. I get it.
No, up north for sure, and it's actually really liberating. And my dad tells me like way more stuff than he tells me in the city, so it's quite interesting.
Where are you, by the way? You're in Russia, but where?
No, so I am back in Phoenix and at home base now, hanging out with my cat. It's very exciting.
Okay, and that's Phoenix for you, or?
Yeah, Phoenix, and then so I went to
Also, we
Prague
got-
for the hacker conference, and then went to Russia to go visit my family, and then Vegas to World CryptoCon, and I just drove into town this morning.
So Juan, where are you again? Are you still in Prague?
Yes.
All right, so we got Guadalajara, we've got somewhere in Spain,
Catalonia.
Catalonia.
Yeah.
Cool.
So by some measures, it's not in Spain.
Depends who you ask.
Sure, yeah, exactly. It's gonna become independent any minute. And then we got Anastasia, who's in Phoenix. We've got Anthony
Texas.
in Houston, and then we've got I think I named everyone. So this is a very global group here. That's why I had to put the meeting time in UTC, because I'm just like.
Mm-hmm. Hey, that's really helpful. Actually, we should book the meetings in UTC from now on. That's really helpful.
Yeah.
I have had them in UTC for the past like 5 years. Yeah. It recently changed from 7 to 8 p.m. because everybody set their clocks back, actually this morning. Well, in the US this morning, and the rest of the world a week ago.
Arizona didn't, right? Right, Anastasia?
Arizona's still the same, but I've been traveling so much that it was like all different for me. I was like talking to Juan the other day, and he was 2 hours apart from Russia, and I couldn't understand why, because he was 1 hour away from Russia like a week ago.
Yeah, exactly.
And then I get to Vegas, and my friend's like, she lives in Colorado. She's like, oh yeah, we're going to be on the same time zone tomorrow. I'm like, sweet.
Yeah. So Arizona always follows Mountain Standard Time. This is a big pet peeve that I have. Okay. Everybody always says MST or CST or EST. The middle initial is D during the summer months, during the 6 months around the summer, because that stands for daylight. Except in Arizona does not give a shit, and they don't follow daylight time, so they're always on MST, which is Mountain Standard Time.
Which is actually a really good thing, because
Except,
the incidence of car crashes and stuff is way higher.
Oh, I can imagine, because people are just, oh my God, I'm late for work. What's going on?
Well, and also just because everybody lost sleep.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But there's a part of Arizona that does follow daylight time, which is the Navajo part. I believe they follow daylight saving time.
Wow.
The Navajo.
Navajo is a racist word. So
I meant Nava girl.
Oh gosh, that's sexist too.
Oh, racist. Oh, what am I doing?
I hope none of you guys have racist costumes for Halloween this year, and it was all PC.
You had a PC Halloween?
No, I did not. Well, I mean, I don't think I appropriated anyone's culture. I was a siren. Unless like a mermaid.
I beg to differ. I'm sure we can find some way in which you appropriated somebody's culture.
I guess the Greeks then, since it's an ode to Odysseus.
Knew it.
Halloween and Dia de los Muertos completely just passed me by, so I think I'm safe.
Yeah, me too. My neighbors invited me over for the Pan de Muerto, but I was like, I can't eat bread, so sorry. Enjoy.
Oh man, that's the best one.
I know, it's got the little like Jesus inside.
No,
that's the Rasca. Rosca?
Yeah.
I need to get
Pan de Muerto, it has, I think they put orange rind in it and maybe cream cheese or something, so it's a little like pastry.
See, I'm never going to know.
And it's got the kind of thing representing the skull.
Yeah,
on top.
like a crossbones. Yeah.
That's right. Okay.
Wait, so why do they call it the bread of death? What's the reason?
Exactly, yeah.
It doesn't sound like something I want to eat.
No, it's delicious. They make it on Dia de los Muertos. So.
And the month.
Got it.
And what?
And the whole month preceding. I've seen it.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the opposite of the bread of life, the Eucharist, the Christ.
Right.
Bread of death.
And much tastier.
Good to know.
Interesting analogy for evil versus good. Perhaps.
No way.
Yeah, the bread of life is unleavened and sorry, go ahead.
I don't buy that thing that death is evil or really bad. I don't know. I don't know how many of you are like astrology geeks a little bit, but I'm a Scorpio, so like my house is always like in that really weird like life, death, rebirth. My name Anastasia actually means resurrection in Greek. And so like the motifs of life and death have kind of always been in my life, and it's something that I've always like seeked out. That's why I have so many books about like, astral projection and near-death experiences and whatever else. And I don't know, I think death is actually like a very beautiful and could be a very positive thing. And I've never feared it.
Well, I mean, that's what Dia de Muertos in Mexico is all about. It's about celebrating, and appreciating death as a transition instead of just being afraid of it.
Yeah, I always like
respecting those who have passed.
Yeah, I always view it as a graduation because, to add another thing to our conversation, like I see Earth as a school, a video game, a school, a dream, et cetera, et cetera. So you come down here and you learn, and then death is your graduation. That means you've finished all of your lessons, whether you failed them or, or passed them or exceeded them. but it's just like, this is done. You've done all the things that you could do. And, I also believe in reincarnation. So maybe the things that you fucked up, you can just like fix them the next life, or maybe you go on to somewhere else and do some other thing. So yeah.
I have no idea.
I think that ties into like Buddhism and stuff that Kurt had originally suggested.
Hey, here's a weird idea.
Yeah.
What about backwards reincarnation? What if you're born at the end of your life and you live it in reverse? Because as far as physics goes, all the math works out the same forwards and backwards. So hypothetically, time could go the other direction as well.
Maybe
like
it's doing that for other people.
Benjamin Buttons or whatever that movie was.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Maybe other people are living backwards and you're living forwards, or vice versa.
What does it mean to be living it backwards if we're perceiving it forward?
Forward.
What does it mean to be living it one way and perceiving it another way?
We're all perceiving it backwards. Are you perceiving it forwards?
Yeah.
Never mind.
It's all relative.
See that, like safety in numbers. Whichever reality has the most backing is the one that becomes the objective reality.
Yeah, I wonder how long it would take to convince people that they were living their lives backwards.
We've been trying to convince them of that for a long time.
I think it usually takes one generation for the previous generation to forget everything that is possibly related to common sense, and then it's like,
let's launch a 51% majority attack on reality.
That's a great phrase, actually.
Yeah, dude, that's exactly what the government does. That's exactly what
they say. Magic is telling a lie so good that the universe will believe it.
I mean, if you look at history, it's just full of examples of like stuff that my parents learned in school was just dead wrong. And like what's a good example?
We can have our calculator at any time of the day, so we don't actually have to learn math. Thank you, teachers.
Well, but what I'm talking about is facts about history. Like this is the way that it happened. I'm blanking on like an example of it, but like there's stuff that my parents are like, oh, I didn't learn it that way. I learned it this way, and I'm like, wow, that's totally opposite.
I get that just being outside of the U.S.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Like the way that we learn about World War II, for example, and the U.S.'s role in it.
Oh yeah.
How much of an impact we have on the end of it, or like, I don't know. There's some interesting gaps in my historical education that I'm realizing more and more now.
Yeah, and there's a lot of like lesser known stuff about who invented what. Like who did what first. Like Thomas Edison is credited with inventing a lot of stuff that he just kind of tweaked a little bit and then made a really good business out of. We were talking about Tesla earlier, a perfect example. I think he stole a number of Tesla's ideas and just marketed them really well.
Yeah, or like Ford. Everybody thinks that Ford either invented the automobile or he was the first to mass produce it, but that's not true. He was just the first to come up with a very powerful, reasonably priced car, which isn't so catchy.
Yeah, he was the first to produce in the numbers that he produced it.
He was the first to produce something that was accessible to the middle class.
I think
but that's not really true though. It's more complex than that. It was about the amount of horsepower that he had and some other things. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's like Columbus thought the world was flat or something like that, or no, he thought the world was round, but everybody else thought the world was flat, and it's kind of like, well, maybe in uneducated circles, but basically in academic circles, it was pretty much accepted that the world was round, and actually the ancient Greeks had proved that the world was round and had measured its circumference. So that's
now it's like a spiral that started. And we got bigger, and now we're back to flat Earth.
Yeah, that's flat Earth is just not. I don't get people that. I think they're just trolls, right? They have to be.
No.
No, I'm pretty sure a lot of them like actually believe it. Yeah,
Some of
yeah.
them are trolls. Some of them
The
are
thing about flat
a lot
Earth,
of them are genuine.
this might be wrong, but what I've heard through various internet lore was that flat Earth started as a group
As a psyop.
as like a group of people on the internet who were skeptics, and they decided as like a mental exercise and as a debate exercise to try really hard to come up with excellent arguments for something patently ridiculous. And then those arguments propagated. And
Oh, so the Flat Earth Society is not about believing that the Earth is flat. It's about convincing people that the Earth is flat.
and that's what I've heard.
So it's a psyops.
So it's a psyop, exactly.
I think it's a good exercise. It's a really good exercise to go through.
Like a group of people trying to exercise. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really important to question even our most treasured fundamental beliefs and have good reasons for believing the Earth is round, not just be like, oh, they taught me in school, so it's probably true.
Yeah.
And I mean, it does make me question myself, because when I talk to an actual flat earther, they usually know a lot more about measuring the Earth's circumference or diameter, I guess, I don't know, than I do.
Yes.
So you've talked to actual flat earthers?
Yeah, and it's very difficult for me to argue with them, because the fact of the matter is I just have not studied the shape of the Earth very much. I mean, I could say you can look at satellite photos, and they're like, but they're all
So here's how you measure the circumference of the Earth. It's pretty easy, okay? What you do is you measure, you measure the length of a shadow. You stick a thing in the ground, and you measure its shadow at noon, and you record the day, you measure how long the shadow is or whatever. And then you go some distance away exactly a year later, and you measure the shadow at that location, and you also measure the distance between your first location and the second location. And then because that gives you, that'll give you a slightly longer shadow, or a slightly longer shadow in one of the locations. And then you can take the difference in the length of those shadows and the distance between the two places, and you can use triangulation to then figure out how round the Earth is.
Yeah, but the government moves the flat plane every year in order to prevent being able to.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing I have about it, because a lot of people who believe in a round Earth, where when you question them, they'll say, Eratosthenes, or similar to the example that you just mentioned.
Eratosthenes, that's exactly what I'm talking about, yeah.
But Eratosthenes wasn't trying to prove that the Earth was round. He was trying to
measure the circumference of the Earth.
Exactly. So for that calculation to work, you have to assume that the Earth is round and assume that the sun's rays are parallel. So that's not.
I didn't realize there was a counter argument to Eratosthenes measuring the circumference.
They've got counter arguments for everything, and that's the thing that's really fun about it, is you realize that if you talk to a flat earther, usually they put a shit ton of time in studying all the arguments against a round Earth, and how many of us round earthers have put any time into thinking about flat Earth?
Yeah.
Not many of us at all, and that doesn't mean that flat Earth is correct. It's just it's really interesting to think about, like, how much we take for granted, and also then to think about how much are you willing to take for granted, and how much are you willing to accept society's consensus on certain things, because there's just not the time in the day to study every single assumption that we have. But I don't know, maybe we should.
Yeah.
But guys,
that's why I don't like to have strong beliefs. Like I don't believe firmly that the Earth is a globe or flat, because what's the point in believing that?
But guys, don't you see? This is why Bitcoin is so mind-blowingly revolutionary. Because for the first time, we have a canonical global consensus about what's true.
Globe.
I'm sorry,
Planical. Hey, you know what? They call it a planet. Plane. It's called a planet. Plane. Check me, globe earthers.
The truth is hidden in our language.
Earth is a sandwich? Okay. Have you guys seen that? There's that cool little documentary called "Do You Speak Venusian?" And it's like the old head, I think he was the head of the British Astronomical Society, Patrick Moore, and he goes around and meets a lot of these people who he says are independent thinkers, and it's really cool because it's like produced by the BBC in like, I don't know, the 60s, I think, and it's interesting because he goes around and talks to these people, and some of them are pretty loony, some of them are more rational, but they just have very bizarre ideas, but they can all back them up. They all have like these reasoned arguments and everything. Like one guy believes, I think, that not that Earth is flat, but it's like Earth is kind of inside out, and there's a giant magnetic ring around the Earth, which is what causes gravity or something like that. But it's cool because all he's saying is, yeah, why not? Sorry.
Come on. What's he saying?
He's just saying that it's all right to think outside the box and be a little wacky and
I totally buy Hollow Earth. That's my Earth theory, Hollow Earth, and that really
I like
the
that
Earth
one.
is a little sun, and there's like a whole civilization living, and we actually should all be living underground. And
Admiral Byrd.
Yeah, all the heat comes from the inner sun, not from the outer sun, because that's ridiculous. It's so far away.
It's not that far away in the flat Earth model, though. So
yeah, it's just like what, like a few miles down.
I mean, the flat earthers that I've met, and I have actually met a few. I have a friend in Puerto Vallarta who's a flat earther, and she's very smart, and she has all kinds of
just nuts.
No, she's not even nuts.
Nuts to believe something different. Yeah.
It's just that you can have somebody who's extremely reasonable and extremely intelligent and studies a lot, but applies their study and their reason to a wildly different direction than most people. And maybe they're missing the big picture of, I mean, for me, the reason why I think it's kind of preposterous to believe in flat Earth is that there's so many like photos that show, and also it would just have to be a conspiracy.
Photos.
It would have to be a conspiracy on such a mass.
Yeah, and what's the argument?
Right.
Seems unreasonable to believe. Just like I don't know if my reality is all a dream or whatever, and there's all kinds of models of the universe that I could come up with that would be perfectly consistent. But it would just take a lot of coordination that doesn't really make sense.
Right, yeah.
Or I mean,
my pet theory,
fine, but it doesn't seem pointless to even engage. It doesn't seem worthwhile to even engage with it.
I don't know, but if you, from a flat earther's perspective, there's a lot of holes in the globe Earth model. I think there's holes in every, and no model works absolutely correcely.
What are the holes? I don't understand. What are the holes in global Earth system?
I don't have them on hand, but there are questions.
I mean, the moon landing is a big one, I guess, right?
Yeah,
that's one that's a little bit more reasonable, I would say, that the moon landing was fake than that the Earth is flat. Like
totally reasonable. The moon landing is definitely fake.
Getting hired by the U.S. government to like make a movie of Neil Armstrong landing on the moon. I could see that happening. I think that there are no holes.
There's not that many people involved.
Right, exactly. It's just people in the U.S. government. But here's the thing: is I think that there are no holes. I think that the we went to the moon theory is completely plausible. Like I think that it was totally possible given the technology of the time. It required a lot of funding. It required a lot of focus, but I think those are things that we had at the time because we were competing with the Soviet Union. It was kind of this arms race, and we were trying to kind of like outcompete the Soviet Union. And so we kind of focused our entire national attention on that,
which is ridiculous when you think about it. Like just the priorities.
Well, it was kind of like, well, who's going to control space? Us or the Soviets?
Half the population of the world is starving to death. Oh, going to the moon, guys! Like, we're going to the fucking moon.
But come on, the moon is awesome.
Eat the cheese there.
And Trump wants to go back to the moon, which I'm for, by the way.
Yeah,
I guess
well,
for me,
If we can, why is this not like a national television? You know, going to the moon, like checking it out, taking like tourist pictures. Like, why is this not happening? Everything else is on Instagram. Who is going back to the moon to take Instagram pictures? I haven't seen a single one. I cannot believe that we've ever been to the moon.
Not yet, but you know, Elon Musk is going to get us all to Mars by 2030. So the U.S. government should be able to get us to the moon by like 2025.
I don't know if Elon Musk.
No, 2050, I think you
Stop now.
working with that. This is my pet theory about the shape of the Earth. So, not that I necessarily believe this, but I think this is a fun idea. So I call it the GTA theory of
Grand Theft Auto.
Yes. So the idea is, so
You
say
beat people until they think that the Earth is flat.
that's one way to do it. No, we live in a sort of video game. Now, when we're on the ground, it makes sense that we see things in a certain way, and things around us, they kind of look flat, and we go, you know, we can keep going in a direction, and things kind of, they go flat for as long as you can walk, you know. But,
except ships disappearing over the horizon.
Oh, that's a complex one. That's
There's definitely no counter argument to that one.
No, there is. There absolutely is. But let me finish my GTA model first. So here's the thing. So say when you're on the ground, it makes sense that you see things as flat. But when you build your little spaceship in this game, and you take off and head up, it doesn't make sense anymore. Once you get to a certain height, it's not going to make sense for you to look down and see flatness expanding out forever, because that wouldn't make sense, because you know when you keep going in one direction on even in this video game, eventually you get to the other side and you come in, you know, the other side.
Back to where you started.
Yeah. So the only way for this to make sense is for when you're on the ground, it seems flat. It actually is flat. But when you look at things from a different perspective, it's going to seem round. It's going to seem like a sphere, because that's the only way. That's how it has to look for it to make sense. So depending on your perspective, it has a different shape.
Well, and this goes back to our discussion about objective reality versus subjective reality, and what are we doing when we observe things and whatever. And I do think that our perspective on things affects, maybe if not everything, at least affects much more heavily our environment than we think. So I'll go with you on that.
Not enough to make the Earth float around from your perspective. Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like the zoomed out perspective and the zoomed in perspective are integrated,
right?
You know, into one single model. So you know, so the model for me is the Earth as a globe. That's the one that makes them integrate for me. So basically, I mean, what you're saying is that, you know, since the zoomed in perspective and the zoomed out perspective are at odds, then one of them must be true and one of them must be false, and there's no way to integrate them. But
so this is why I place a high value on personal firsthand knowledge, right? Like, I don't want to just believe that the Earth is round or believe that the Earth is flat because someone made some arguments. I want to take that inquiry into my own, like, be responsible for it myself, and ask the questions and say, okay, if the Earth is round, could I disprove that? Are there ways to disprove that? Or if the Earth is flat, are there ways to disprove that? You know, Chris, you mentioned the ship, you know, going over the horizon. I have a much better way we can look at this. The moon going over the horizon, or the sun going over the horizon. I don't see it slowly disappear and get smaller. I see it drop. Its size stays consistent the entire time it goes above my head, from sunrise to overhead to sunset. If it was actually coming over your head, think about if it was flat in the distance and it's a circle, it would actually appear oblong, and it would get bigger and bigger until it gets directly overhead.
Well, wait a minute. It's not, this isn't the flat sun theory. This is the flat Earth theory. We're not talking, is the sun also flat in the flat Earth theory?
Okay, let's That's a good point. That's a good point. I think normally I hear them talk about the sun being a disk, but let's suppose we call it a sphere.
Okay.
Even so,
I don't know the details.
Even so, it would go from a small point to being very large overhead at noon, and then becoming smaller again as it goes away. And you should be able to point.
I've seen footage where
That's only if it's changing distance.
I've never seen that personally. My personal firsthand knowledge doesn't support that. Also, after the sun sets, if the flat earth theory is correct, I should be able to point a telescope at the horizon and then see the sun, which is just absolutely not been my experience. Here's another really good reason why I think we should doubt the flat earth theory. I'm going to try and show something. Maybe Katie can help me.
Oh my gosh.
Okay. So this is a really bad drawing, but here's Africa, here's Asia, there's Australia. I'm sorry, Kurt. Australia's way bigger than that. My bad. Here's North America, South America. Oh, and that's Greenland. Now, this is supposed to be Antarctica, right? The ice sheet.
Okay.
So if the sun is doing this thing where it goes around like that, okay, that's the idea. Think about the edge of the circle. So the sun is putting light, maybe the sun is putting light right here, or maybe like that. Well, think about all of this extra edge right here that's not getting sunlight. How long would your days be on the edge of this circle? You would only have sunlight for 2 or 3 hours, regardless of whether the sun was towards this, towards the center or farther away. So there's no way that this can be an accurate model of the Earth, because you would only have sunlight in Antarctica for like 2 hours year round. You would never get more than a few hours of sunlight. So that's like my personal.
I think going to Antarctica and just experiencing the South Pole and magically teleporting across, to the various edges of the circle. I think having that personal firsthand experience would disprove that model, right?
I mean, don't a lot of
I need to go
Or
to.
you could just
the point is that nobody goes to the South Pole.
I have an easier way to prove it. You could just fly from Moscow to Turkey, because for whatever reason, that's like the area where the plane
That's the North Pole.
and just low enough where you look out the window and see the freaking curve. Like, I've seen the curve of the Earth so many times going from Moscow to Turkey, because that flight just like
Same effect as the ship disappearing over the horizon.
it's extremely clear.
There's like so many different ways we can look at it.
Argument for the ship disappearing over the horizon. There's this very interesting piece of footage where they break it down, and you see what's actually happening is there's a mirage. Oh, this is serious. Like the ship can disappear over the horizon, but there is more to it than that. It's not as simple as just looking at it, because what happens is there's a mirage above the water. So it's like, I don't know if it's the vapor or what causes it, but the thing is you'll see the ship start to disappear, but it's like it disappears from the bottom. So if you measure the distance from the top of the mast to the water line, it's still proportionally the same. So it's not like it's not.
Can you like screen share are you looking at something right now, or are you just?
No, I'm just going from memory, so I'll have to look it up.
I'm just having a little trouble picturing it. That's all.
Okay. So the thing is that the distance from the top of the mast to the waterline remains proportionally the same, even though you can't see the bottom of the ship. So the bottom of the ship starts disappearing because of the mirage, not because it's going over the horizon.
Okay.
At least that's how it is.
So they believe in mirages, but just not the curvature of the Earth.
Well, that's what the footage shows. So hopefully I can find the footage. Otherwise, it sounds like I'm a crazy man. But but the footage is quite interesting.